everybody out there in YouTube land. It's your T-shirted historian with my co-host Grim.
Zang.
And we have as a guest for all the way from, was it Denmark?
The Netherlands.
The Netherlands, okay.
You know this, you make that joke all the time about the chicken and waffles.
That's true, that's true. Oh yeah, this joke?
Did you know Holland invented chicken and waffles? Really? Before that, you can only get chicken or waffles. But they were the first to put them together. Black people all over the world would be forever grateful to the Dutch for that.
You do know the Dutch started the slave trade.
Those motherfuckers!
Yeah, pretty accurate, I guess.
Hey. And hello, Jaden Hamilton. Ah, it's our first person. Our first person in the chat has shown up. Jaden Hamilton. Yay. All right. So
We do pick a bad time of day for people.
we do, but you know, it's better for, you know, the European people who don't come to the stream anyway. No, occasionally we get some really cool European people showing up, so it's worth it.
We're all too busy having siestas and extramarital sex.
Yeah, true.
All right. So our topic today is approaching dungeons, dungeon design, dungeon craft, dungeon ecology, dungeon lore, etc. I gotta be. Oh, look, and we got a Kringe.
Hello.
Hey,
Hello. So there we go. We got 2 Americans and we have 2 Europeans. We're balanced now.
But he's Dutch. Does that really count?
Yes.
I mean, my friends call me a closeted American anyway, so.
There you go.
I mean, yeah, you
No,
were working on
a
firearms.
clogged American.
Doug Perko. Oh my gosh, Doug actually showed up. Hey, Doug, it's good first time seeing you here, I think. So good seeing you, man. So, we've only bumped into each other on Twitter, but I called him out specifically to come hang out on the show.
Cool.
And yes, you are cool. All right, so I'll be honest. One of the things I really like as far as when I create dungeons, and I blame FromSoft for this because after playing so much Dark Souls and Elden Ring and everything else, something that they are a master of. Well, actually, I should also include Fallout in this as well. They do so much good environmental storytelling, which is basically, you know, you could kind of figure out what happened just based on the stuff that you find in the dungeon. And the guy I know who used to be a master of it is the guy who made the... oh, man, my brain is just... I need more caffeine. Need more caffeine.
The guy who
Darwin's
made...
World. Darwin's World, yes. Yeah. The guy I used to work for who made Darwin's World, whose name I can't remember right now, was really good at environmental storytelling. What? Who?
Dominic Covey.
Dominic Covey, yeah. That's the guy. Dominic Covey was really good at environmental storytelling because when he built his dungeons, which effectively, you know, they're ruins, but, you know, as far as...
a post-apocalyptic game, right? I never played it.
Yeah. And you'd find things in there which would be like, you know, in rooms and things that would be like an indicator of what happened whenever the bombs dropped or whatever. Even in his very first adventure, it's like you have to explore this old nuclear missile silo, and at one point you encounter this massive mutated monster that's just crazy, and you know you kill this thing, and then later on, while you're going through the wreckage, you find this little dog bowl and collar. You know, it says like Spot on it. So
yeah,
I love stuff like that. I love stuff like that.
I honestly did not think you would go with environmental storytelling when you started talking about FromSoft.
Really?
I thought you were going to go with the interconnectivity.
Well, you could actually. I'll let you talk about that if you want to, Kringe.
I just like how, let's say part 1, everything, no matter where you go, links back to the shrine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always in inventive ways. Like, you could see where, if you know where they are, you could see where all the shortcuts are when you start a new game.
Huh.
like all the elevators, the path down through the catacombs,
Yeah, that's true.
the sunken
That's
city.
true.
It all connects back. It didn't
Yeah,
do
good.
that so much in 2 and 3 because they had a hub.
Right. But yeah, the first one, yeah, everything is interconnected in a way. And I guess a good dungeon would be the same way too. Although I didn't see a whole lot of that in like a lot of your early modules and dungeons and things like that so much.
Well, when you're designing a dungeon, interconnectivity is something you don't really need to do for smaller modules. That's for something you would do in like a super dungeon. Like what was the one in Forgotten Realms?
Which one?
The Yawning Portal.
Oh, I was gonna say the Mad
Undermountain?
Yeah,
Mage.
Under Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a dungeon. It's a super dungeon. You're going to spend a lot of time. That gets a whole campaign. You're going to want interconnectivity there.
Hey, Kip Marlowe, it's good to see you too.
But for like a one-off little dungeon that's somewhere in the Borderlands, you don't need the interconnectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need a beginning and an end. That's what it.
Yeah, that's why you could do one-page dungeons.
Yeah, I do kind of miss that old style of play sometimes, where each sort of mission or dungeon was self-contained, though. There's something to be said for the interconnectivity being your characters and what they do. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's story connectivity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But another thing with dungeons is a lot of people I've noticed can't get past the idea of a dungeon is, stone tunnels underground. Anything
Yeah.
can be built as a dungeon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, you could do a city as a dungeon. Let's just take Manhattan, for example. Chinatown would be one level. Little Italy could be another level. It's just the sections of the city. You treat them like a dungeon.
Yep.
Very true. Very
I
true.
recently ran a abandoned subway station as a dungeon. So
That's definitely a dungeon.
Well, yeah, that's
That's-
underground.
That's a
Best
modern
place
day
for
dungeon.
grinding is a nightclub.
Well, they cleaned up Times Square, Grim.
Oh,
You're not going to find that in Manhattan anymore.
yeah.
Oh.
People tend to think of cities as being something very different, though. I think.
I mean, they are, but I'm just saying, in a RPG
Yeah.
campaign, you can run them as a dungeon.
Oh, Doug Perko makes a good observation. On the other hand, Caves of Chaos and Keep on the Borderlands do feature a degree of interconnectivity. Yeah, unfortunately for the low-level characters who could stumble into the ogre, bunch of first levels run into an ogre, by
Well, it
running
depends
into
on-
the wrong cave.
How many first levels there are?
Well, I mean,
I mean, if you have a
yeah.
party of like 10 players, they're gonna kill the ogre just by, action economy.
So what are we
Well,
calling a
yeah.
dungeon then? Is it any contained space in which an adventure takes place?
That's what that's the way
yeah.
I describe it.
I think that's
Because
fair.
that's what makes them work. I think is that the dungeon is a constrained area in which stuff happens, but it's not. It railroads you without railroading you. Like you're going to this place to do this thing, and while you can free roam within that area, it's still contained.
Just think of it in video game terms as like an instanced area.
Hmm.
You load in, do what you got to do in that area, and then you load out.
Yeah. In Dragon Warriors, they call it Underworld because I think they were trying to evoke the more sort of mythic feeling of it, almost like you're traveling through fairyland and coming out the other end.
Oh, there you go, Victor. You got a question there.
well, I just changed my name to explain it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it shows up right now. There you go.
Oh, he's stay buffed.
Yeah, he's the stay buffed marshmallow man. I kind of like the I like the idea of a living dungeon because I think what happens a lot of times is especially newer GMs, they tend to have what I would call like a static dungeon where they go in, they kill a bunch of stuff, and they have to lick their wounds, so they have to leave the dungeon. They come back and everything is just the same as when they left it.
So it's like a haunted house at a fair. You just kind of go from room to room, and each room is something different.
Oh yeah, Kit Marlowe. Yeah, the castle in the original Ravenloft was a dungeon. Yeah, and Castle Amber. the interactivity between the occupants. Yeah, see, I like stuff like that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everybody as a player loves, living dungeons, but as a GM, I'm lazy,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, it is a bit of a pain in the butt to keep.
and I'm
track of
already high prep to begin with, and that's just adding another layer that sometimes I just don't want to deal with.
Jaden has never played D&D before, but has a 5e starter set sitting on the shelf. Well, that's okay. Leave that on the shelf. There's other stuff out there besides 5th edition.
Yeah, but that's the thing. There's nothing wrong with playing 5th edition if that's what.
No, and there's nothing wrong with it.
5th edition. I think 5th edition does what it's supposed to do very well, and that's Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Although it's interesting to think. Okay, we mentioned Keep on the Borderlands earlier and stumbling into the ogre early on. Okay, for 5th edition, a party could take down the ogre probably with very little difficulty.
But
Because
could they take down a frost giant? I mean, there's still levels of.
yeah, there's stuff like that. Yeah, but I mean, okay. The frost giants are deeper in. The ogre is like easily accessible from the very beginning. You just wander into the wrong cave and blam.
Yeah, I mean, players don't seem to remember that they have the option of running away when you play 5th edition. Because
And that happened in 3rd edition as well.
Yeah, not as much though. I think third ed still had a level of deadliness.
It really did, because going up against larger creatures meant that they would get
dealing with,
AOs and stuff.
Tail swipe, wing buffet, breath, claw, bite.
Yeah. But like, okay, but that module was actually written for 1st edition. Well, actually, it was written for basic.
Yeah, keep on the Borderlands.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, okay, like a bunch of little basic players running into an ogre at 1st level, they're dead.
Well, yeah, that's 1st edition. Running away was a bit more understood. It was lower It was lower, not magic, lower power. So the players would understand, like, we can't beat this. Maybe we shouldn't fight this.
Yeah,
I mean,
teaches you caution.
Yeah, part of this, I guess, social contract of playing 5th edition is the GM isn't going to throw a Great Worm Red Dragon at your 2nd level party.
And Doug has a good
well,
chance.
I used my spell. I'll meet you back at the tavern.
Yep.
Yeah, ogre has a 50% chance to succumb to sleep spell and kill one character every time it connects. Let me point that out. Okay, this is cute and funny. We've been playing 3rd edition / Pathfinder for so long. When I started running castles and crusades, a lot of the spells and stuff like that are old school. So the very first time I was running a scenario and a bunch of stuff jumped the players, the wizard whips out the sleep spell. And then he describes the spell effect to me, and I'm like, wow. I did not know this was so powerful.
Yeah, sleep has always been a low level, I win this encounter spell.
Well, that's the thing. In 3rd edition, it wasn't. It wasn't that powerful in 3rd edition. The go-to spells for, your mages back then were pretty much damage spells.
Let's be honest. The go-to spells in 3rd edition were summon spells.
Well, nobody ever used summons.
But,
you didn't have people who were like, I'm going to play a wizard to the full strength.
Oh, no, I disagree.
Summon builds are a lovely thematic thing, but it's a pain in the ass at the table.
They're a pain in the ass for everybody else.
Yeah.
But if you really want to milk the most out of a wizard in 3rd edition, you conjuration.
Let's not put wizards in glory holes. Okay.
Yeah.
On milking machines, yeah.
Definitely not on milking machines. Never use those statements in the same statement.
So, do you think dungeons have to make sense?
Well, actually,
depends on the team, I guess, or who you think in that setting made it. If it was like humans that made it, probably they tend to follow a certain design philosophy. If it's like Fae, probably not.
well,
Or once
that's
you
an
get higher level and you start going to outer planes, is anything going to make sense in Pandemonium?
Yeah. I mean, when a beholder makes a dungeon, it can go in any direction.
Yeah,
Good morning,
beholders. That's a problem because they all hate each other.
Yeah.
So you can't really do that.
Unless there's a way to make them, what are they, the hive queens or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea, but That isn't it. Okay, I mean, this kind of ties in with the question. Like a dungeon that's exclusively made with beholders, nothing but beholders. Let's say that for some reason, you did have a keep or something like that was constructed entirely by beholder labor. Well, the beholders themselves probably ain't the ones doing it. They're
The
compelling
beholders
something
themselves
else.
No, the beholders themselves are the ones doing it because they need to carve something out. Disintegration at will.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a fair point. Yeah, the structure of that place is going to be really different from, like, say, a kobold lair.
Like a beholder lair in the side of a mountain would probably look like hamster trails. They would just make beholder-sized tunnels
Naked
running
mole
through the
rats.
city.
Yeah.
Though, there's quite a lot of beholder hybrids, aren't there? Because they're like born out of nightmares and things.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
So-
ones that ride
so you
giant
could-
vermin.
So you could have a hive that have been hybrid with insects, like a beeholder.
You've been
Yeah.
sitting on that pun for a while, haven't you, Grim?
Yes, but I'm also somewhat serious.
Yeah, no, it could, especially because there are beholder queens or something. I forget what exactly they're called. But their ability is to control other beholders.
So talk about the Dark Eye TTRPG. I've actually seen it up on the shelves. I haven't picked it up because I've already got so many setting books and so many new games and stuff that I have to run by the players anyway. We're playtesting Axe at the moment. In fact, we're on our last week of playtesting Axe, and then I'll give a review on it.
I should pick up Dark Eye for my library, but
I
That
have
would be
the
it.
quick start rules, and I glanced at them when I first got them. It seemed interesting.
It is very popular here. Some say it's more popular in Germany than like D&D is. And
It's a
used to
German.
have sorry, go ahead.
It's a German RPG, right?
Yeah. I actually used to have the PC games that were based on it. They were kind of like the old like Might and Magics and like stuff like that.
How does it compare to, like, say, Warhammer?
System-wise or setting-wise?
Well, both.
I haven't played Warhammer Fantasy in a while, so I'm actually not sure.
From what I remember, it was a bit lower magic.
Ooh, even better.
And I might be confusing it with something else. It might be a bit more Fey leaning. Like they play a bigger part
Yeah.
Okay.
because it's Europe. They're going to use the fairies.
It says, I don't much care what is in a dungeon. I care why it is there, and the why has some internal consistency. Yeah. Constraints that are for similitude demands. Yeah, exactly.
There's that word
So
again.
so what are the good reasons for there to be a dungeon then? I mean, cellars under a castle, prisons. That's the classic thing, but those are usually pretty simple in reality.
Well, I mean, ostensibly, the typical dungeon I think of is it's something that is abandoned by people, either, through disease or just, wandering away from an area or something because of whatever. And it's just left behind, and, nature abhors a vacuum, so stuff will find the area and say, oh, look, it's got a roof, it's got walls, it's kind of, I can tunnel some stuff into here and turn it into more of a home. It's already pre-built.
Yep.
So they'll just move on in.
Yeah.
And it just depends on what's in the area.
That's just a cave in the winter writ large.
Basically, yeah.
If you've got the existing structure, I mean, one way to do it would be to think through the history of the place, what it was used for, and what creatures have settled there. So you might start out with a castle that gets besieged and destroyed and collapses on top of its cellars and dungeon proper, and then a bunch of goblins move in and they burrow some tunnels into the hillside surrounding the castle.
Yep.
That sort of thing. So you can build it up in stages and give it a history.
Well, that's how crypts and stuff over here tend to work, in real life. Like if you go beneath the Vatican, there's just miles of tunnels with all had different purposes, were augmented, were built on top. It's the same with like Paris and stuff, the Paris catacombs.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the most famous example of the catacombs.
Yeah, Earthdawn was an interesting inversion of the trope where you live in dungeons and explore out into the world and the wilds.
Huh. Oh wow, yeah, under Warwick Castle, yeah, 12 rooms. I always want to go to Warwickshire.
Didn't they find some more there recently? I think, or other
Jeez.
tunnels in the town.
That's crazy. Can you imagine that? I think that's
There's there's Smugglers Caves along the coast of the West Country and on the Isle of Wight here. Those are always interesting. And smuggling tunnels, speakeasies, things like that. Those are interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's
also
tunnels here in America. Especially in Chicago, New York, the bigger, older cities. There's tunnels from Prohibition.
Yeah. There's also those salt mines in Eastern Europe where they built like that chapel. Well, no, not chapel. It's like a whole cathedral with the bones.
ooh, wow. Yeah, stuff like that's just like
Yeah, a lot of
insane.
Europe is pretty metal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's lots of Napoleonic forts. Yeah, it's like artificial islands. There's Nazi earthworks all over the place, and we probably still haven't found all of them.
Yeah, I've used those in like World of Darkness, so
Yeah.
great place to hide super science.
Yep.
Cold War facilities, abandoned underground stations beneath London.
Yeah, there's closed off tunnels. Any city with
Yeah.
an underground transportation would have like closed off tunnels that something could have moved into.
London's great for that, actually. If you are running World of Darkness stuff, London's and Paris are great places to choose. Paris has its catacombs. London, you've got the old Roman sewers, you've got the Victorian brick sewers, and you've got several rivers that have been basically paved over and now run underground. So it's an interesting place beneath the surface.
He has you trained well, Baron. They're always mentioning Earth Dawn or 13th Age. Abandoned subway, yeah, Ironcaster.
I was actually thinking about this yesterday. There's a whole legend about the Philippines, about Japanese Imperial Army tunnel complexes that they hid treasure in.
I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could even do stuff with that, which I was planning to do.
Yeah, you could take one of the little islands in the Pacific, and the entire island is catacombed with.
There's those couple of abandoned islands off Japan, aren't there, that were coal digging islands, and now they're just these crumbling city blocks.
Yeah, there's whole islands in Japan that had like little miniature city type structures, and they're completely abandoned. They're very ruinous.
Cappadocia's interesting.
One idea I had for a modern themes like Mega Dungeon would be a version of the Kowloon Walled City.
Oh,
Has ever heard of
jeez.
that? Yeah. That would be like a great like modern like fantasy type or like urban fantasy like
I
Mega
think
Dungeon.
Shadowrun did something.
Oh, I'm
similar
not
with that.
surprised.
I think they had like a walled city that was overtaken by like bug spirits or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Even though I don't like Shadowrun. Keep your elves out of my cyberpunk.
The only way you're going to get me to pay attention to Cyberpunk is if there's more to it. I'm not a Cyberpunk fan.
I would actually say that areas around Fukushima in Japan and modern day Japan, since they're all abandoned.
Yeah.
Gee, I
And
wonder why.
Yeah, they're all kind of like, dead zones now, basically. But those are dungeons in a way.
Perfect example if you want to add a time constraint to a dungeon. Use Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just look at the
Can't-
smoker games.
You can't stay there long,
No.
but you can go in, get what you have to do on the time limit, and work its way out. That way you could work an extra level of, I guess, danger into it.
Well, there's a whole game series about that very concept, basically. So Stalker.
Stalker.
But everyone assumes that those Chinese cities are just being, built and abandoned for no reason. But also in Chinese mythology, when you burn or destroy something, it passes into the spirit world to pass on to people. So maybe they're just building these cities and letting them be destroyed to pass them into the spirit world. So they're
That's
actual
also
ghost
possible.
cities.
Sent them to the upside down.
Yeah.
A world that's a combination of France and Japan. That would be
Oh my god, that
kind
would
of
be
interesting.
that would be insufferable.
They have a lot of similarities. They both really like their comics and comic books, and they sail a bit close to perversion on those things as well. Both of them.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
And they both have really good food.
A bit close. I'm pretty sure they passed the horizon on some of those things.
I'm being politic. It's before the watershed.
Ah,
Yeah. We're still in
What-
the first 20 minutes.
What's your most memorable dungeon? real life or dungeon equivalent from any game, any book, anything that you've played in? What sticks out for you as something you remember?
There's so many, but I gotta go with my favorite, Expedition to Barrier Peaks, because because it was so unlike anything. It was so original because it was like, it's a freaking spaceship. And then, of course, Goodman Games brought out the Original Adventures Reincarnated series, where they took the original adventure and then they added on to it. So now you have all the surrounding area before you even get to the dungeon. And that surrounding area has some of the creatures from the ship have left it and have infiltrated the surrounding area. So, like, you've got, like, packs of, killer androids that are out there, watching some routes and stuff like that can ambush your party, so they can give them like an early taste of what they have coming. But then actually once you get into the spaceship and it's all locked off by the color cards and everything else, so it's kind of like it's a mega dungeon without actually being called a mega dungeon, because it's so huge. You can't explore it in one session. I'll be honest, it's a full campaign to run that.
That's what most mega dungeons are designed as.
Yeah, but it wasn't originally designed to be that way. Originally it was a tournament module, so somehow they were expecting players to get through this whole thing in one, 3 to 4 hour setting.
I don't think they expected players to get through the whole thing. I think the point was to see who got the farthest. Yeah,
or who got the farthest, yeah. And, okay, something written along the same... Actually, it's written by the same guy, James Ward, that came out a bit more recently was, actually, I think it came out a long time ago, but it's been rewritten recently, is Starship Warden, which is, oh man, that book is so huge. It's like, it literally is an entire giant spaceship, like designed to, like a colonizer ship or colony ship.
Yeah.
So it's got it's got a whole living agriculture or archaeology and everything in it. It's got a, things.
At that point,
interact.
It's just its own setting.
Yeah, it pretty much it is. That's that's the whole campaign.
It's very fun.
Mm-hmm.
But in my setting, the people actually forgot that they were on a colony ship, so to them it was their whole universe basically.
See, that's an interesting thing.
Well, I've seen an example of that was not done well. World of Cinnabar.
Well, that's because that was World of Cinnabar.
Yeah.
Laser
World of Cinnabon.
Doug Perkos is the Star Lost. Where have I heard that before? Other than wasn't that a King Crimson song?
It sounds like a King Crimson song. Or a King Crimson cover band.
Yeah.
I think for
also
me,
a science fiction. It's a Canadian sci-fi show from the 70s.
Oh, okay.
For me, I think Death Trap Dungeon, the fighting fantasy book.
Yeah.
Because it justifies all of its weirdness and its House of Horrors sort of style, which is something that normally you would look down on. But, the Baron Succumvit, has built a dungeon specifically for a competition, stocked it with monsters and traps and so on, and so it makes all that stuff that kind of ruins your suspension of disbelief, it makes it all make sense, which is a masterstroke, I think.
They actually had a PC game based on it in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Death Trap Dungeon wasn't my first fighting fantasy game book that I picked up. My first one was Citadel of Chaos, which was some of that didn't even make any sense, but Warlock of Firetop Mountain actually had the best dungeon ecology I'd ever read.
We're
talking
kind
about
of
game
stratified by sort of ruling caste, wasn't it?
Like it kind of had like your typical gamut. Is like, early on you meet kind of like your guards, and which are like low level monster type things, but then as it got progressively worse as you got deeper and deeper into the dungeon, if you actually managed to make it all the way to the Warlock, then you would have had to have dealt with a Cyclops, a Minotaur, and all kinds of
That's
stuff.
why you like it. It has a Minotaur in it.
Oh, I like anything with Minotaurs in it. But, I mean, you got to consider, too, that it's also a solo adventure. So going one-on-one with a Minotaur is tough.
I've never played any of those. What is Fighting Fantasy?
Yeah.
Never really did that. That was not part of my background in RPGs.
Oh, wow. No kidding. Big
I
Rebel.
was pretty much D&D from the 90s till about high school when I discovered World of Darkness, and that's pretty much what happened. And then I went back into Pathfinder and started getting into some OSR stuff.
Yeah, we all kind of went through our World of Darkness phase, I think.
Because it was so different than anything else that was out at the time.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I would call World of Darkness necessarily like your typical FRPG, because it didn't involve necessarily dungeons and stuff.
It's not a fantasy RPG.
Well, yeah, it's not. I mean, well, come on now. You're playing vampires and it's not fantasy. Come on.
It's called horror.
My first experience with World of Darkness was the first PC game, which is pretty much just constant dungeons, which is funny.
Yeah, that's true.
Bloodlines?
No, the one before it.
That, where you're the Crusader, and then your world collapses on you and you wake up in modern times.
We don't know how to get into modern times.
Yeah.
Redemption was what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I still have it.
Is that the one that you needed fan-made patches to make work?
No, that was Bloodlines.
Okay.
What was good was that you could use it and run it over a network to run adventures, which we did a couple of times, which was pretty cool. Did that with one of the versions of Neverwinter as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the two Neverwinters had like whole system for that, for basically GMing, like, online.
Yeah, which was cool.
Yeah, it was the early version of Roll20.
Yeah.
Kit Marlowe mentions Castle Amber as a revelation. You had a railroad hurdle of impenetrable mist, but after that you got to interact with gloriously mad collection of NPCs. Yeah, I'm not sure which one came first. But there was an old Judges Guild adventure, which I actually got to look at the original because a friend has it. He has a bunch of the old original Judges Guild stuff, and I'm hoping to show those off at some point. But he had Teagle Manor, which was old dungeon made by third party, Judges Guild, and it had a crazy family that basically was living there, full of NPCs, and they've expanded on it since then, and the book is massive, and there's much more interactivity, and you get to meet all of the family members, and it describes their interactions with each other even more now. So it's a full-fledged campaign, almost.
Castle Amber, was that based on the Amber books?
No, not at all. Castle Amber was an expert level module. It's been reprinted and it's been updated by Goodman Games. It's the one with the big old, giant grabbing the tower.
I know what the art is. I just never played it, so I wasn't sure if it was based on the Chronicles of Amber or not.
No.
Because, you hear Amber.
Yeah.
No, there was an Amber game, though. Based on Zelazny's Amber.
Yeah, that was diceless, so I was a little weird about that.
Yeah. Kind of interesting question here is what I say is the definitive version of D&D.
You ask 5 people, you're going to get 5.
Yeah, probably the first one.
T-shirt, what was the first edition of D&D that really struck with you? Like, what was the first one you played?
First one.
Okay,
first edition.
Grim?
The first version of D&D I played, which was nowhere near the start of my role-playing career, was Redbox Basic.
See, and Victor?
If you count the video game, 2nd edition. If you count actual playing D&D, 3.5 for me.
See, and for me, it would have been the Cyclopedia, so...
Yeah.
Which is BX. It's
Beck. It's Beckham. There's no I.
What?
The immortal rules aren't in the Cyclopedia.
Oh.
It's funny. I eventually ended up buying a copy of the basic rules, and the box that I bought secondhand had the Immortals rule in it. So I had the beginning and the end, and nothing in between.
I'm sure you're a smart guy, Grim. You can figure it out.
I actually bought the Rules Cyclopedia recently, and it did have the rules for the Immortals in it, and the PDF anyway.
Oh, they might have added in, but the original one I have doesn't have it. It had a rundown of the Immortal stuff, but it didn't have the actual rules.
Yeah, you might be right, because I only glanced over it, so it might have left stuff out.
Well, I started with Moldve Basic, and if we're going back to talking about dungeons on that, it came with Keep on the Borderlands. I didn't really consider that a dungeon because it was like caves and stuff like that.
It was a collection of dungeons.
Yeah, but I honestly I never really saw it as a dungeon, even back then. But the first module I picked up that I did consider an actual dungeon, because I had Palace of the Silver Princess, and not the orange one, the green one.
It's the Slavers, right?
No, that's the one with the the magical city that's been I don't remember. It's been forever.
So many of those old modules that I either have like played once or never played but read, so they all kind of fit together.
Palace of the Silver Princess is the one with the decapod with the illusory powers that that kind of distracts your players with scenes of gratuitous BDSM.
In the original orange model.
Yeah, and it contains several sly references to the Gore novels by John Norman.
Mm-hmm. But out of that original series, the first thing that I really consider to be a true dungeon in the sense of the word dungeon was The Lost City, which was written by Moldve. And as a matter of fact, I am running The Lost City again for my group. In fact, that's what we're playing, Axe. We're using The Lost City to test Axe, because I thought, okay, I need a standardized kind of like dungeon setting to test this system.
So I remember the first time I played D&D, I'd played, I think, Dragon Warriors beforehand and several other games. So I went into D&D thinking, I'll play a mage. I like playing magic users. I've been reading the Earthsea novels a lot, so and I remember in the Red Box adventure, underneath the broken down gates at the very start of the adventure, there's a carrion crawler, and it immediately paralyzed me and ate me, and I was like, D&D is bullshit. I'm never playing this again.
Early versions of D&D were very much you take one wrong turn in the dungeon and you're dead.
Yeah.
But you should have been used to that though if you grew up on the fighting fantasy books too, because a lot of the Steve Jackson ones were bullshit.
you had more than one health.
Okay, yeah, it's true, but there were a lot of times where
you did play a wizard with your D4 hit dice, Grim.
You had instant kills though in a lot of those dungeons.
Oh yeah, but it didn't have an audience, so there was less shame involved.
Okay, there's that.
Yeah, it was closer to like the choose your own adventures, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember playing one of the original Baldur's Gates when I was pretty young, like maybe 10, 11. And I went into one of the dungeons and I saw a floating skull up ahead. And I'm like, how hard can that be? It's just a floating skull.
Oh, you found the Demi-Lich.
Yes.
The Demi-Lich?
Yeah. And it cast Disintegrate on me. And I'm like, oh, well, guess that's that.
Yeah, that was part 2, I think.
Okay, and if we're going to talk about dungeons, we have to talk about a specific class of dungeons that I call fuck you dungeons.
So everything published for Lamentations?
Well, funny you would say that. I actually asked James Edward Radji IV that very question. I said, dude, why do you have so many fuck you dungeons? What do you mean fuck you dungeons? And I said, well, they're so exceedingly hard to the point where it's like, it feels almost ridiculous trying to get through them or to explore anything. And he's like, no, I mean, I make the experience hard because
that's bullshit. Because I have the little box set that comes with the very tiny dice, and the dungeon that comes in it is designed for first level players. But if you touch the doorknob to the tower, you die.
Yeah. That's the Tower of the Seer. Oh, Tower of the Stargazer. Yeah, that's the very first. That's the one I mentioned to him too. I said, why is that such a big fuck you dungeon?
Come on, if you're gonna make fuck you dungeons, admit to it.
It's a bit like playing Call of Cthulhu with very timid players. Okay, so the clues are in this book. Well, I'm not fucking reading it.
See, I've been in groups of players who were trying Call of Cthulhu. So my friend brought me in. He was like, "Mike, you know the rules. You're gonna show them. Be the co-GM." And they understood, like, you're going to go insane in Call of Cthulhu, so they wouldn't do anything. So by the second session, I was like, you know what? I'll read the book. I'll open the door. I'll light the candle. Just can we get on with it?
You hear unearthly gibbering from behind the door. I fire my pistol next to my ears so I go deaf and gouge my eyes out. I'm not losing any sanity.
I think you just lost sanity pulling that stunt.
Yeah.
Probably.
isn't one of the problems with Lovecraft stuff is though that as players you need to be bold, but as characters you need to be timid. So you kind of have to find a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, the thing is, a lot of players who didn't start with Call of Cthulhu, they start with D&D, and there's no sanity in D&D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, they realize once I lose my sanity, I'm done. I have to do it again. And any edition of D&D is a bit easier to make a character than Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, Kit Marlowe makes a good point. As always, I love Kit. If I ever get a Kit, if you ever want to get a spot up here on the panel to talk, please, you have an open invitation. But it's like, yeah.
Other thing about Call of Cthulhu is there's lots of things in it which you would think would be dungeons, but they don't play out that way when you're playing Call of Cthulhu. Like,
Opium
there might be
dens or
tunnels that the burrowers beneath have made, but you'll only venture in there at the smallest amount possible and flee. There's Cyclopean underground cities, but you don't go and explore them. They're just kind of there.
Yeah,
driving you
a
mad.
lot of it is background.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a
more
map
window
painting in
dressing.
an old sci-fi series.
Good analogy. I like that. And while we're talking about FU dungeons, we got to talk about the granddaddy of FU dungeons, which is Tomb of Horrors.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Arno. And that was literally
isn't that-
designed as an FU dungeon.
Yeah. Isn't it the Dark Souls of dungeons? Before Dark Souls was Dark Souls?
Dark Souls is tough but fair.
Yeah, Dark
Word
Souls
there
is
is
tough
fair.
but fair. Tomb of Horrors is not fair.
Unless you get a herd of cattle,
Yeah.
drive them through the dungeon ahead of you.
Even
Halfling
that
on a
won't
stick.
work.
Halfling
Even
on a
that
stick
won't
or
work.
A clan of dwarves.
Your best chance is to
Not
go.
play.
Well, there's that. Either that or find a whole bunch of hirelings. Just get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hirelings. Build a small city / encampment outside of the dungeon. Also, like set up housing and everything like that. Hope that they will have children and everything else, and then teach them to go down into the dungeon.
Basically, play Darkest Dungeon and just hire people to do it for you.
Yes, yeah. I would honestly
Shades of Indiana Jones.
big time.
Indeed,
and
we found it.
Darkest Dungeon is kind of an FU dungeon too, but
Yeah, but the game is that there's the buy-in for a fuck you dungeon. You have to know what you're getting into. Like, to just spring the Tomb of Horrors on an unsuspecting brand new player is kind of a dick move.
it is. Hey, Raven, it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, and that's the epitome of the kind of Gygaxian random House of Horrors sort of thing.
And yes, Doug Perko, you are absolutely correct. The visceral hatred of Tomb of Horrors, which taught a generation of games that the most important thing was to kill the part. Yeah, and unfortunately, that was the very first dungeon I ever read. Because my friend had bought a copy of Tomb of Horrors before I even had B1. And before I even had the basic set. He showed me the Tomb of Horrors, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. All this stuff that just kills people.
So, I don't know, that non-adversarial thing, right? It's one of those sacred cows of role-playing, which just makes me tempted to fuck with it. Because I don't know if you've played the Descent board game ever, but that puts you as the game runner kind of adversarial to the players. But what you can do, how you can fuck with them, is limited by cards and tokens and things. And there was an old RPG and computer game called Rune, where you were all basically co-players and co-GMs. So one of you would run a mini dungeon for the other players, and then it would switch over, and then the next person.
And what was this called? Rune?
Rune, yeah.
I'm gonna look into
Was
that.
it Greg Stafford?
The late Greg
someone
Stafford.
else.
I'll just type in Rune RPG. It's a solo tabletop RPG by Spencer Campbell. No, that's new.
No.
Okay, as far as Descent goes, yeah. We're on our 3rd edition of Descent, and the newest one...
Robin Laws.
Oh,
was
Robin
who it
Laws.
was. Yeah. I knew it was someone with name recognition.
Yeah, he's one of those names. You could just throw it out and you might be correct.
The newest version of Descent is actually all computer generated. I mean, yes, you still have the board, you still have the pieces and everything else, but the computer pretty much tells you what to put down when, and where to put the monsters, and what happens when you interact with stuff. So they have taken the GM out of it.
It was hard to play because there were so many tokens and bits and bobs.
Yeah, well, it was Fantasy Flight Games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they like
Still
destroying
is.
forests for games. They do.
Yeah.
They like destroying forests and making custom dice, which I hate.
Yes,
Yes.
I hate them for that too.
Okay, and it's interesting. Okay, you bring up Descent. I almost hate to say it this way, but compared to the way that modern players kind of play TTRPGs, there are a ton of tabletop role play, or not role playing it, but tabletop games like Descent and
Gloomhaven.
Bard Song and Gloomhaven. Yeah, which actually
Or
do
what's-
dungeon crawls better than the TTRPGs.
What's the cool mini or not dungeon crawl game?
Mighty Dungeon.
Massive Darkness too?
Yeah, I have part 1 of that.
Yeah, if you have the second one, it supersedes the first one.
I like their Zombicide game, but I haven't bought into Massive Dungeon.
Zombicide, I've had so much fun playing Zombicide. What is it, Black
Zombicide
Plague?
is great.
Yes,
Zombicide is a great just beer and pretzels game with your friends.
I own everything for Zombicide, but I also own Massive Darkness 1 and 2. And pretty much the first thing you find out when you buy Massive Darkness 2 is everything that you had in Massive Darkness 1 is now completely and totally obsolete. Throw it away.
Well, that's called a second edition.
Uh-huh.
You can keep the minis.
Yeah, I did keep the minis, but I threw out
Yeah,
all the cards.
Cool
and
mini or
crap.
not, they do good minis.
They do great minis.
I wound up painting my entire Black Plague set because I got the Kickstarter, so I painted all of it, and we never played it, but I used it for an undead campaign in D&D.
Same.
Yeah.
That's originally why I bought it.
Speaking of Lovecraft and dungeons, there's a board game called I think it's Mansions of Madness.
Yes.
And it kind of plays like Lovecraft Hero Quest. It actually is really fun for like little dungeon crawl type stuff. Like there's one module where you have to survive Innsmouth while like all the hybrids are like hunting you. So there's like mobs chasing you through the streets and like stuff like that.
Yeah, like board games, I think a lot of the modern fantasy board games do classic dungeon crawling better than say modern D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Ravenwolf Garb, yeah. Hero Quest. Yeah. That's come back too now.
Yep.
Modern-
I actually have my original copy of that still.
Modern dungeons tend to be contained encounters quite often. Like maybe you'll get 2 or 3 strung together, but they're much more like the kind of mini dungeons you might find in Elden Ring or Skyrim. It's not a great big complicated delve.
They're closer to, I would say, like an amusement park where each room is a separate ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each floor is like a different part of Disney World. Like this is Frontier World, or this is whatever, Galaxy's Edge that nobody goes to.
And Kit points out something good. Yeah, the differences between a system which mechanically and mindlessly punishes based on the algorithmic turn of cards and GMs who can entirely arbitrary or worse actively be antagonistic. Yeah, he's correct on that.
See, I'm thinking at some point of putting together a kind of system that can do that, but for standard OSR games or whatever, a way of balancing the threat against the party, so that you can just throw something together and play it adversarially because my trap card or whatever.
So closer to a deck building dungeon crawl.
Yeah, it stops you being an arbitrary dick, but you still get that.
You still get the chance to be said arbitrary dick,
to be a
depending on
bastard.
what you have
Yeah.
in your hand.
Yeah.
It sounds. There might be something. Didn't they add like dungeon crawls to the newest Magic the Gathering expansion?
Oh God, I hope not. I don't know.
It's Forgotten Realms is now in Magic the Gathering, so I think they had like a dungeon mechanic now. You might be able to look into that for some ideas.
Cool.
Well, they literally turned Magic the Gathering into a D&D setting now. I mean, that's what Ravnica was about, wasn't it?
Honestly, I'm surprised it took them that long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't have. I think they kind of missed the boat. Really, it should have happened a lot earlier.
I haven't played that one, Arno.
Yeah, I mean, Planescape. Boom, that's your tie-in.
Yeah.
You got to go head to a
Infinite
secret
Plane.
location. Okay. Oh, okay. See you, Jaden. We really haven't spoken much about dungeon design and stuff. Well, a little bit, but
Yeah, we're finding things to tie them into dungeons. Like
We
a
are.
perfect example of a dungeon that's not a dungeon. 40K.
yeah,
Space
yeah.
Hulk. Probably one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
best board games ever made. It's a dungeon.
Yeah.
It is a dungeon crawl. it's a dungeon crawl without it being called a
But-
dungeon crawl, but yeah, it is.
All right, but what do all those gene stealers eat when there aren't space marines around?
That is
other.
each other, I think.
They go into hibernation. I don't know. What did the aliens eat in Aliens 2?
But the colonists.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
when the colonists were gone before the Marines
They weren't
got there,
all gone. They hadn't
they
all
were.
been gone for long.
They were busy incubating.
Yeah, wasn't there still a survivor
The girl.
briefly?
Newt.
Yeah, the
No,
woman
she survived until part 3.
that we shall not speak of part 3.
I actually enjoyed part 3. I think it's a fun setting, the prison.
Get
That's
out.
a pretty good dungeon too. You could turn that into a dungeon.
Yeah,
True,
definitely.
true. Prisons are good. Shopping malls make great dungeons.
Yes,
I
they
actually
do.
bought the Alien RPG recently by what's that company? The one that does the. It's escaping me for some reason.
The same one that does the Blade Runner RPG. Yeah,
Yeah,
another one.
the Year Zero engine stuff. Yeah,
Modifius.
yeah,
No, it's not Modifius. It's like
They
I wanna
distribute for them.
Oh, they distribute.
I want to say it's like Leading Edge, but it's not Leading Edge because Leading
no,
Edge
Leading
is
Edge
the
did the
aliens.
old Aliens.
The old
RPG,
aliens. Yeah.
Free
Alien
League.
RPG.
Free League.
Yes.
but
Free League Publishing. Yeah. Thank you, Raven.
they do a great job of tying all the lore together. Like it's a really fun read just for the lore and like.
I
just
would
the
not want
expanded
to be
universe.
that guy. The guy who has to tie in the aliens lore to one thing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Just blow my. I'm working with one of my writer friends as like a lore master, and it's insane.
Mhm.
And I can't imagine doing Aliens or Predator or trying to work them both together.
Oh man.
So asking, what the aliens eat, right? That kind of leads us into dungeon ecology, which is
It does.
one of the things we were going to talk about. So
Yeah.
is that something you care about and bother with? Should it be realistic, or do we just, dragons,
To an extent.
magic?
I would go to an extent. Like if you have a dungeon that's basically an orc cave, outside the dungeon is going to feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
because
have-
stuff
you
is
know,
going to
just
have to scavenge.
A bunch of like creepy crawlies, like giant bugs and stuff. Yeah, it'll feel it, but not as much because even large bugs probably aren't that. Unless they're
Yeah.
attacking the town, you're not going to really notice them in the wilderness.
Yeah, there's a rule of thumb in naturalism that basically each step down on a food pyramid you go times 10. So if you've got a half-ton minotaur, right, he's going to need 5 tons of grazing capability, right? Or if you've got a dragon that's preying on herds around its den, you can kind of figure out its range that it would have to travel in by figuring out what the populations of cattle and elk and whatever else are in the surrounding area, how much it's going to have to eat. That can be a useful sort of guide.
And you
when
could also
putting
use to
together
say
a dungeon.
dragons, for the most part, at that level, are intelligent.
Yeah.
Hey, Mephisto, it's good to see you.
And Kit, those series of articles are great.
They are great. Okay.
Was that
And
the
Mephisto-
ecology of? Sorry, I missed the
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
Ecology
Yeah.
series from Dragon.
The Ecology of
Yeah,
series,
those were fantastic.
they were great. Mephisto has a good thing here that says Warlock of Firetop Mountain had a good intro. It was a cave entrance to the mountain. Yeah, it was. But if you think about the ecology of it, it's like, okay, one of the reasons you're going there to stop the Warlock is the fact that he has been preying on all the areas outside, forcing them to demand to bring him tribute and stuff like that. And ostensibly, that's what he's using to keep all his guards and everything fed, is whatever monies or food or everything like that people were offering up.
There was an old RPGA module that had an interesting intro. So you were hired to protect a caravan, and then a rock swoops down out the sky and picks up the caravan and carries it off and drops you on the top of this mountain in its nest, and you have to escape from there. And there's different pathways down the mountain to
Oh,
escape.
that's fun.
Uh,
I thought you meant an actual rock for a second. It's like a boulder swoops down. Like what? But then I remembered the giant bird. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely does. Players probably wouldn't expect that.
no,
No,
they wouldn't.
And
No.
it's railroady, but it doesn't particularly feel like it.
It subverts expectations.
But in a good way.
Well, I mean, okay, that should also bring up another good point too. Is like, is it really railroading to get the players into the dungeon? Because it's like, you could say that the Lost City that I'm running right now is kind of railroady because you don't even have an option on it. How it starts out is, the GM reads the text box which says, "You've been traveling for weeks with a caravan. You got lost. It's a sandstorm. Blah blah blah. You're out of water. You're out of food, and all that." And then you stumble upon the opening to the underground area. And what do you do at that point?
Yeah, that's more of an in media res sort of opener, isn't it?
Yeah, and plus dungeon crawling as a genre of adventures, like dungeon crawl sandbox, there's a buy-in. You're doing a dungeon crawl. So the players aren't going to mind a slight bit of railroading.
Although here's the interesting thing. Okay, there are factions down inside that dungeon that can actively compete against each other or work with your characters and stuff like that. They have food stores and stuff like that, and they have water sources and all this other stuff. And it's not immediately revealed where all that stuff comes from. I think that's one of the things the update actually did was they gave you surrounding areas that kind of like, oh, look, this is where they're getting all this stuff from.
If the worst comes to the worst, you can just put Cheech Marin out front of the dungeon going, "Pussy, pussy, pussy, goblin pussy, orc pussy, drow pussy."
I mean, that would actually be a fun dungeon, though.
Yeah, but then you do that, the players are going to expect vampires.
Yeah. True.
And then you subvert expectation.
There you
Bam!
go.
It's werewolves.
I mean, you remember
Actually,
the scene
my
with
players
the...
really won't care. They'll just want Salma Hayek from the 90s.
Who wouldn't?
It should not be the
shows that
GM's.
Aztec temple behind the bar. That would be a really fun dungeon, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I agree, Kit. It should not be the GM's sole job to give a player a reason. That's something the player should take responsibility for.
I
And
think
this is
that's
something-
a whole other can of worms that has nothing to do with dungeons, though.
Yeah.
It is, but it's something that ties into that kind of is. I was up on Basic Experts channel yesterday, and by the way, that's a good channel. You should go check that one out.
Yeah, I'm the co-host apparently now, so...
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm stumping for someone else's channel again, but
Maybe that was
yeah,
him a favor.
yeah, they were talking about XP systems and milestone and all this kind of stuff, which is now that's a new argument type thing, and everybody knows I hate milestone, but the old tournament style of leveling up was, okay, you play 3 sessions. If you survive the 3 sessions, you get a level. And at first I thought, wow, that's a crappy system. But then I started thinking, no, it kind of works, because it's like, okay, you could run an entire session and the players are like, well, I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to stay in the tavern and drink and have fun in town. I'm like, okay, and you're still going to get your level, but it's like at some point you're gonna have to tell your characters like, okay, well, you're you're running out of money, or if this is all we're going to do every single game session and you just earn levels, then you either need to get out and do something, or maybe find another GM.
Add an addendum to that.
While you're dicking about, the Dread Lord is gathering his forces.
Well, there's a great text about that where, like, instead of doing the actual campaign, the players wanted to, stump for like gay marriage, and then just as the wedding was about to happen, a lich attacked, and they were like, "What the hell, GM?" And he was like, "Well, you didn't do anything."
Yeah. you let everything get powerful, so.
But I would put an addendum to
red
that.
nail.
3 sessions, you get a level. 3 sessions where you move the plot forward.
Yeah.
The way I do it in Curse of Strahd currently is at every 3 quests, plus if you find one of the magic items that you need to defeat Strahd. And that kind of spaces out the whole adventure, so you should be around level 12 when you finally face him.
DM Blackwall, I also run sandbox games, so.
Yeah, being upfront, if you need the players to do something, being upfront out of character sometimes is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the whole, if the player knows it, I mean, if the character doesn't know it, the player should know a thing. I mean, I would hope we're mature enough to be able to separate that when needed.
Mm-hmm.
But if my GM says, look, guys, the next part of the game, you're going to have to just go with the flow here, fine.
Doug says, you don't hate Milestone. Well, okay. Some people don't. I do. I hate Milestone because I just hate the whole arbitrary, you get a level because I think you deserve a level.
Yeah, but then you could also go with the arbitrary XP thing where it's like, I know, say, 50 goblins will get me to level 2.
Yeah.
And if you're running a sandbox, let's just go find the goblin cave that, there's a goblin cave.
Mm-hmm.
Raven Wolfguard. Yeah, Fabled Lands. I have that entire series. Yeah. It's good. The Fabled Lands books, literally there is no end to it. You can just endlessly keep wandering around and doing adventures and getting into trouble and stuff like that. It's really fun.
There were some old Tunnels and Trolls adventures, which, while a lot shorter, would loop like that as well. So you could adventure
Basically,
back.
go to New Game Plus.
Yeah.
I mean, my current favorite indie RPG is basically just one giant dungeon crawl, and I actually like that. Where the game's just like, this is what we're doing. This is the focus of the game. You're going into this dungeon.
There's an old game, I can't remember the name of the game, but it was by Spiderweb Software, which kind of inverts the trope in a way. You're prisoners who get lowered down into a dungeon that's basically an entire world, almost, underground, and you have to kind of find your way, a way to
I
live.
see some inspiration for Whitechester there.
There was also a German computer RPG that was similar, but on a smaller scale. It was more modern.
I think every system has put out a module where it's basically you get put somewhere by someone and you have to work your way out.
But yeah, it's just that inversion sometimes is fun. You don't necessarily think of the adventurers going into a dungeon the same way you would about goblins raiding a farmstead, but it is essentially the same thing. You know, you're going and you're fighting them where they live and taking their treasure. So like delving into like Skaven cities in Warhammer is very much like that. You know, you're
the Warrens. Raven, yeah, you hear there's more books coming if they're not already. As far as I know, Dave Morris and Jamie Thompson are working on their what is it, Volcanum book series right now. So I don't know.
Advanced Dragon Warriors.
Yeah. So I don't know. They were our guests, by the way, last season on our last episode of last season. So you should check out that one if you haven't already, because it was awesome. They were awesome guests. And it was so much fun talking to them. Yeah, the Blood Sword series. Yes, that's good stuff. I love Dave Morris's writing, man. I really do.
And he's got a solid grounding in like British mythology and things, which really comes through in his writing, I think.
Oh yeah, big time. Arbitrary and milestone are not the same thing. Milestones should require actual milestones. Well, yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but this is why I don't like class and level systems.
Yeah,
I'm with Grim on this. I've just gotten tired of I can deal with one or the other, but together I'm tired of it.
Yeah, so, and in D&D, really the levels 1 to 6 are the sweet spot, and after that it gets increasingly, less reward for the effort.
Yeah, that's why with 3rd edition E6 was pretty good, pretty big.
Yeah.
DM Blackwall, the artifact XP idea from your game. Buff, you were in on that conversation a bit more than I was. I was a little distracted, but
the way I remember it is that you find a magical artifact. It gives you I think he said 3 XP, and then you have the choice to keep it because it might give you like a magical ability or something, or you can sell it to your patron basically for additional XP. So you kind of have the choice do I want more XP or do I want to keep this item because it gives me fireball or whatever.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I like that idea just because it's kind of like some people do like a slower go up. My players actually prefer a slower go up. So I said, okay, you want a slow go up? Here's a slow go up. I made everybody play.
It also depends on the style of games you're doing.
Dual class Castles and Crusades, which in order to dual class is basically, you're playing the 2 classes combined. The only problem is you're also paying the XP costs of both classes.
So it's multi-classing from 2nd edition.
Kinda, yeah.
Do you guys ever play Feng Shui? Or Feng Shui if you want to be...
I had the rules.
I've
had the rules. I never got to play it.
At a con.
So there's this rule in that about the reason all these different factions are fighting is that there are these places that are like nexus points in ley lines.
Hey, Master of the TDS.
In dragon lines where the chi connects, right? So typically a temple or something will be built over one of these points, and the more of these places that you control, the more access to chi you have, which is a great reason to have dungeon complexes and to have people fighting over them. And that might be something interesting to port into other games like fantasy games, where that's your justification for people having more hit points or having levels or whatever. It's because all of this mystic energy is flowing through them from these key places that they have conquered and taken control of, or or attuned themselves to, which could be an interesting way to do things.
Yeah, definitely.
Kit brings up a good one. He says what he dislikes about dungeons is classically defined as they tend to compress or reduce characters to their mechanical basics. How good are you at finding traps or fighting? Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the problems,
I think that's how they're designed, because let's be honest, RPGs grew out of wargaming.
Yeah,
they did.
You'd want the guy with the big sword in front, and you'd want the archer in the back. That's part of the mechanics of just the game.
Yeah, but you also want the thief way up front, because he's the one who has to find all the traps. And actually, that is something I do want to point out is, like I said, we're testing Axe, and one of the things I'm finding is one of our players decided to play the thief, and the thief is pretty much the heart of the group, because he's the one who finds the traps, listens at the doors, and all that kind of stuff. And he's always ahead of the party. He's the one who gets more checks than anybody else in the party. So he's basically the one who gets the most interaction in the game.
Well, with a good thief, you'll be able to skip a lot of the stuff in the dungeon. That's their job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I almost kind of find it a little bit imbalanced in and I guess it's going to be that way with any kind of a dungeon crawl or any kind of a system where you have a lot of stuff like this. I don't know. It's just something about it just kind of irks me just a tiny bit, because it's kind of like I would really like the other players to be able to do stuff besides sit around and stop looking bored while they wait for the thief to do everything.
Instead of doing traps, add just pure combat encounters, or add something where it's more role playing. That's kind of on you there.
At least everyone gets perception checks now.
Yeah. I was going to say that's one benefit of like the more modern like skill systems, because even the rogue might not have a certain skill that's useful in the dungeon, like translating, some mule that you find.
Well, keep in mind, okay, Kringe, I'm running a published adventure in order to test a published system.
I understand that it's a published adventure.
Yeah, it's a published adventure, and I'm testing the mechanics of a published system.
Are the rules written in stone or on paper?
It's Axe.
So it's probably stone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's Brosar endorsed. So I'm gonna say mechanically.
I prefer the
HOSR. Yeah, I prefer the HOSR myself. Well, okay. Mechanically, so far, my opinion is it's good mechanically. It's very much like old school D&D, like in almost every respect.
And that's my issue with it, because if I really wanted to play old school D&D, I would just play old school D&D.
Yeah, I do kind of wish there was a little bit more that everybody else could do, though. But okay, yeah, Netherborn. Hey, Anthony, you got my book shipping out to me yet, man?
Well, yeah. Now that you mentioned it, he does.
I bet he probably does. He sent me my first copy of the book, but it had a broken spine, and he said he'd replace. So that was nice. He says he ran a zombie apocalypse campaign where the players died almost every session. If they survived a session, they could show up in later, but almost every session the players made new characters. Yeah. When I was writing for and working on Year of the Zombie with Tim way back in the day, the first time I started running that, we had a guy who died 3 times in his first night. He just kept getting eaten by zombies, man. It was rough.
A bit like Shotgun Diaries.
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, I once ran a campaign where I told the players to make a pool of players, like a pool of characters, and each session, well, not session, but each time there was like a break, they'd be able to switch it out. So it was kind of like XCOM.
Yeah.
And Kit Marlowe, yeah, you're right also on that.
When I run Blood, my horror game, I usually run one-shot scenarios, because that way nobody worries too much if their character dies, but I usually make sure there are reserve characters.
Yeah. And for anyone who doesn't have Blood, you can get Blood specifically just for some of the critical hits. Because those tables are amazing, especially if you're doing an urban, like a modern fantasy, because there's crits for belt sanders.
Yep.
Yes. I ran one session where they so this boat gets wrecked on a Scottish island, and they basically get hunted by the descendants of Sawney Bean, the Scottish cannibal.
Yeah.
But one of the characters immediately died during the yacht crash, and so was stuck playing the family dog for the rest of the game. But it was brilliant.
that
It was
would be fun,
fantastic.
That sounds really fun. I would do that.
That sounds fun. Doug says this is why you don't love mega dungeons. You do like to let the players stretch their legs RP wise. And Lost City is a great example of old dungeon rich with RP potential. Yeah, I agree. Because there's factions inside that dungeon. Yeah, the players don't necessarily have to be hostile with the factions as they run into it. And that also brings up another good point with dungeon ecology and everything else. It's like, I don't know about more modern players, but since all the creatures that you run into in a dungeon, for the most part, unless they're all mindless monsters like undead, you don't necessarily have to fight everything. You could always make deals, or as long as you could communicate with the the monsters, or they're not
shut the door and use an iron spike.
Well, that's another way, but if there's groups in a dungeon, you can kind of work together with different groups to either overthrow the other group, or you can make deals and stuff like that. My favorite critter, my favorite humanoid in all of gaming is the kobold. And I do old school kobolds that have the minuses on all their stats.
Do you do the dog kind or the dragony kind?
I like the dragony kind just because they look cuter than the doggy kind. But although I don't know,
confirmed for not a furry.
Yeah. Although
I mean, it's scaly then.
I have seen some Japanese designs of female kobolds that make me kind of rethink maybe I should go for the doggy kind. But but it's Japanese, so what do you expect?
Yes.
But anyway, I try to paint them whenever I have a dungeon crawl going, and I have kobolds in it, as the players don't want to mess with them because their traps are so nasty and so numerous.
What are they? Tucker's kobolds?
I don't know. Actually, I might have gotten that from Tucker's kobolds originally, way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like even
kobolds.
Tucker.
Well, it's like communities that live with kobolds nearby would rather leave them food or money or offerings and stuff like that to make sure the kobolds don't go messing with them.
When I use kobolds, I go all the way and basically play them as the Viet Cong.
Yes, me too.
So if I'm going to use kobolds, anybody who my longtime players, they'll just be like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, that's how I've been using goblins since I ran into a Goblin Slayer. I turn them into cheating, nasty little bastards.
Yeah, that's what you do with things that are less than a hit die.
You do really good goblin voices too, by the way.
I usually don't even use. If I'm going to use the classic one hit die humanoids, I usually go for hobgoblins.
Doug is right though. He doesn't love mega dungeons. I hate mega dungeons. I remember my introduction. Well, actually, my second game of 5th edition. I went and got into a game session where the guy was running Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and
I feel so sorry for you. That place is sucked since 2nd edition.
I regret that. I regretted that instantly because it was kind of like, okay, so it's a 20 level dungeon, and the whole campaign centers around clearing this entire 20 level dungeon. No thanks, I'm out. I quit after about the 3rd or 4th session because I just couldn't handle it anymore.
Because
there was no RP.
Exterminators then, aren't you?
Yeah, basically. I'm kind of like, if I wanted to do this kind of stuff, there are computer games out there that I could do this with, which Kit also brought up is like, mechanically, if you're just going to do a dungeon crawl, there's lots of computer games out there you can do that with.
I mean, Rogue, the original roguelike, that's that. Random levels, get as deep as you can.
You can get Diablo 2.
That's the game.
Diablo 2, Diablo 3.
How do we feel about health and safety dungeons?
Health and safety dungeons?
You've got to have ramps. They've got to be wheelchair accessible.
Oh shit! No.
Yeah, no.
Okay. I don't mind. I wouldn't mind them if they make sense in story.
Yeah. I think it would be fun for a one-off, and the only case it would be is like, okay, if the head bad guy down there is himself, disabled in some way to where he has to use wheelchairs, then it would make sense that you have wheelchair access for everything in the dungeons. Kind of like, oh look, well the Overlord has to get through here.
I don't care about the wheelchairs. I mean, again, setting and feel. I mean, if we're playing Paleolithic, which is a great system, by the way.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's cavemen RPG, but everything, every single item of equipment, there's crafting rules for.
Calvin, did you see
so
my
you can't always
participation
find a
prize?
spear, but you can make a spear. But
Maybe
if I'm running Paleolithic, I'm not, and they want to use a wheelchair, I'm gonna be like, what the hell is wrong with you? But if we're
Kronk
doing,
make wheel square.
But if we're doing Eberron, I'm like, yeah, great, use a wheelchair, fine, have fun. It's Eberron.
It could be fun playing like lawful evil health and safety inspectors going into a dungeon to assess it.
Like that guy in the original Ghostbusters that wants to shut down the
But
device.
he like going to the other big bad guys. I think he means.
Sorry, Raven, we're only on YouTube right now.
We're
Probably
going
on Spotify.
to, the Atarax dungeon to make sure he's up to code.
Hey, Poncho.
Yes. I'm sorry, this dragon horde simply isn't big enough. This is barely a collection. We're going to need another 10,000 gold pieces here.
And you call yourself, shuffle some papers, a young adult dragon?
Yes.
This should
YA
clearly be
dragons.
God, evil health and safety would be more fun.
treasure levels L, but this is clearly a K. There's a problem here.
Yeah. Chaotic
treasure
evil
is
health
better.
and safety would be, well, those banisters have got to go for a start. How is anyone meant to topple dramatically off that walkway? What are you even doing?
Where's
Star
the
safety
where's the
inspectors.
chandelier, people? This season's swashbuckling is in. We need chandeliers.
Yeah.
Oh man.
This is an oubliette. We're not supposed to have chandeliers. Don't care.
See, anytime someone comes up with something like that, Death Star safety, I just think of the Eddie Izzard skit about the Death Star canteen.
Traps don't match OSHA standard. Yeah.
Oh, God.
You're going to have to blunt these punji
you're right.
stakes. You have someone's eye out. And is that poop?
Okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah, flattening consequence of dungeons. They reduce the range of available consequence. If death is the worst. Oh, no. Even in the old dungeons, they had all kinds of stuff that was way worse. Yeah. Because, they a lot of the older dungeons had, like, fun mechanics and stuff like that. Like, they would turn your characters, like, tiny or, poison gas them or disease them or...
What was it, Wonderland?
Well, no, I mean, just all kinds of different stuff way back then.
There was the adventures that were basically Alice in Wonderland.
The Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. Yeah, I remember that one.
I remember one dungeon. It was a fuck you dungeon. So there's this door, and the switch is behind one of 3 armholes. So you have to put your arm into the hole to turn the switch to open the door, but you don't know which one is which. So the player puts his arm in.
Slice.
I check the table. No, it turned his arm to stone.
Oh.
Right? And then he pulls his arm out, and it's hanging by his side. And I thought to myself, that's going to weigh a hell of a lot more than flesh and blood. So I took great delight in describing how the weight gradually tore it off his shoulder.
Ooh, yeah.
It's kind of a sign of the times now. But I do notice there is one item that used to be a fuck you item, a cursed item, I should say,
The deck of
that is no longer in the game, and that is the old girdle of femininity, masculinity.
Oh.
I agree with them, like taking that out. It's stupid.
It is.
kind of fetish
Jokes on them. Every adventure's non-binary now, so it has no effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't they make the elves non-binary recently? So yeah.
I don't know.
What's his
I got
name?
nothing against it. It's just
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
It's a
Don't make that your
two-dimensional
selling
spell from
point.
Blue Helm. Yeah, but that used to be an old one. And I won't say that I've ever used that one on anybody. Although, interestingly enough, I had player characters who actually sought those things out just because,
Yeah,
whatever.
that
But,
could be
okay, whatever, dude.
in my defense, we were teenagers, and one of the barbarian characters accidentally got hold of that and got gender swapped, and then his solution to every problem was to flash his boobs at whatever it was.
I mean,
There you go.
you're a teenager, so it probably worked.
Now,
It did work most of the time.
I will say one of the why that was so nasty back in first edition was because they did have
Minus 4
mechanically
strengths?
different stats for the
God,
genders.
I hated that.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm
That
sure
was
you guys,
optional, though, wasn't it?
Hmm?
That
Well,
was
it depends.
optional, though.
Are we
No.
playing first edition, or are we playing Bro SR first edition, where if it's in the book, we have to use it?
Yeah, if it's in the book. Yeah. I should also note that the game that was created by a certain nefarious Norwegian person also has gender differentiation
he
on
also has
stats.
He probably has stat differences on the different races too. I mean,
Actually, it was funny you would mention
the human races.
No. Okay, he has so far it looks like dwarves are the best thing to be because they have all the stat bonuses and all the abilities. But elves are decent too.
You mean
but then
dwarves,
there's
the things drawn from Nordic myth? I wonder why
Yes,
he would make them so good.
yeah.
I think we meant ethnicities.
Yes. Well, actually, in a very forward-thinking way, he does list everything as species/race. So I'm like, oh well, okay. But
So does he still
He
have
has-
what were they called? The Coppermen and the
hold on, I'm getting there. Kringe, can I talk? God damn it, it's my own show.
No, you're never allowed to talk on your own show. You know the rules.
you invited us.
It's our show now.
It's your show now. Oh no.
Look at me. It is my show now.
Okay, well, he's got 3 different races of men. He's got like the high men who can actually use, magic and stuff like that.
Hyman.
I know. He's got the common man, and then he has what he terms the bronze men, and he describes them as mixed race. Which and they have minuses on almost all their stats, by the way.
Well, that's
Which-
wrong. Has he never heard of hybrid vigor?
Well,
Yeah.
actually,
Well, no, at least in the first edition of what was it, my Frog?
the game invented by a nefarious Norwegian. Thank you.
Okay, the game invented by him. The bronze men were like coppermen, and they were basically just Semites.
Yeah.
That's literally
Well-
all they were.
Well, I mean, that's more or less how they're described in this one too. Well, they're not described as that specifically.
He hit it a bit better.
He's hidden it a bit better, I guess, since then. But he calls them mixed race people, which I started thinking about. I'm kind of like, well, if you have animals and if you mix race, if you mix breeds, they tend to be more hardy and have a lot less problems than if you line breed. So I don't see how that applies. But
Tigons and ligers.
yeah. Well, okay, those are bad examples, I think. But
No, those are actually pretty good examples because ligers get huge.
yeah, they do, but they're kind of like, don't they get like too big, like to the point where they can't really carry themselves around?
Strains their heart, but they're incredibly powerful creatures.
Oh yeah.
Mule.
Pretty much my favorite animal.
Great movie.
Yeah. 3.5 also had the optional rule for stat difference. Oh, I forgot about that from 3.5. We never used it, and yeah, pretty sure that's when WotC dropped it. Yeah.
I mean, if you strictly want to play a simulationist game, don't play D&D. But if you want to play a simulationist game, there would be differences.
Yes,
it's just
but
it's hard to quantify because the D&D stat strength, for example, measures overall body strength. It's not divided into upper and lower body or
Well,
other
they
aspects.
tried that in second edition, where they added extra like substats to strength, dex, con.
Yep.
They also actually back as far as first edition, they also were running into the old charisma problem, which is like nobody could figure out how charisma worked, so they had the comeliness stat added on too.
Christ, that was...
No, I could see that.
It's
I
a
can see
great
that.
dump stat, comeliness.
Well, okay.
I see what you did there, Grim.
No, I actually want to bring that back, but I also am strictly defining how it works because comeliness is a measure of attractiveness, so therefore it modifies an NPC's reaction to you before you interact with them. Whereas if you have a low comeliness score, it could affect your character negatively before they meet you. However, if you have a high enough charisma, you could reverse somebody's opinion of you just by interacting with them. And by the same token, if you have a high comeliness but a low charisma, you're kind of like, the typical, oh, look, beautiful on the outside,
Hotter
ugly on
than
the
the
inside.
sun, but not that bright.
Himbo.
Yeah.
So how's that going to reflect in dungeons, though? Other than in Goblin Slayer, when we know what happens to pretty people going to dungeons.
Ew. Well, I guess it depends. I mean, then you're getting into a whole different area. It's like,
And
like,
the other thing, though, with adding like how good you look as a random stat.
what?
you get to make your own character. You should be able to just choose how they look.
Well, there is that, but then you tend to fall into the whole self-insertion type thing. Because, if you have a chance to define how your character looks, then everybody's going to look gorgeous and everything. Very few people are going to go out of their way to say, my character is a hunchback with warts on his face and a one eye larger than the other and one big droopy pinky that drags along the ground behind him when he walks. And
you'd be surprised.
So standard Warhammer character.
And he smells like a dung heap at all times, even after washing.
That's just a high charisma character in Warhammer, like Grim said.
I think you'd be surprised. One of my players, and they're a 5th edition player, and that character basically looks like Danny DeVito. I mean,
you could have fun with it.
Yeah.
I tend to find that players, both male and female, tend to distribute their statistics in a way that somewhat conforms to gender differentials anyway. So I don't know that it's something you especially need to reflect in the rules.
Muscle women are pretty popular these days, though. To be fair.
We all
depends
have
on where you live. It depends on where you live. Yeah. And
the other thing is, like,
Flat is justice.
Nobody's going to make, say, a character with like 12 strength and describe them as like a rippling brick shithouse.
Yeah.
Maybe they just have bodybuilder muscles, not strength muscles.
You know what? I've been punched by a bodybuilder. It still sucks.
Well, that's
maybe they wear
bodybuilders don't have
inflatable
muscles. Yeah. their muscles aren't that bad. A power lifter hitting you, on the other hand, will kill you.
We're well away from dungeons.
Yes,
we are well away from dungeons.
12 strength is still above average, so it could be like a really fit, like, cardio bunny. Like, it doesn't have to be like a...
Okay, here we go.
That sounds like a trait from a Fate game.
Or worse, it's like she's incredibly limber. She's like, like a gymnast type.
I think I followed Cardio Bunny on OnlyFans.
Okay, here we can bring this back to dungeons. How does, like, say, someone who's built like a rippling shithouse go after the kobolds in their warrens?
Yeah, exactly.
Start throwing them.
That is another dungeon aspect you could talk about too, is the size differential. Actually, that was more of a problem in 3.5, 3.0.
Really, because 3.5 they explicitly made everything 5-foot squares.
Yeah, but then someone rocks up playing a centaur.
Yeah,
well, that's your fault, isn't it? I told you we're doing a lot of. I told you we're doing a lot of dungeons. Why did you bring a centaur?
Well, okay, but the other thing is like if you had areas designed by kobolds where they're small areas, is like, your medium character can get in there by squeezing, but the squeezing would cause you stat penalty or minuses on your stuff.
And meanwhile, they've got a tunnel that comes out behind you.
So
they stab you in the butt.
Yeah,
that's what I did with goblins on people.
Kobolds do that too.
You need to watch maybe less Goblin Slayer sometimes, Grim.
No.
I did that with my kobolds recently too. They had like their own little like tiny tunnels that the players couldn't go in, and they were using them to like move around between like the different areas and like ambush them and stuff.
Again,
exactly.
The Viet Cong. They're the Viet Cong.
Yes,
pretty much.
They are.
They're not going to win a slugging match with the fighter in plate mail, so they use every advantage they can get.
Yep.
Resist big people imperialism.
This was not so good.
I was going to say, there was one good thing in the Dragon Warriors books, is they had little diagrams of how to fight effectively in a dungeon, so that you could move your fighter back into the doorway so that only 3 creatures could engage him at once.
And carry a spear, not a Zweihander.
Yeah.
I've seen systems, including some optional rules in C&C, where, if you are using a big weapon type thing, you get minuses for using it in a smaller space, or you can't use it in a smaller space.
Makes sense.
Dark vision, bane of my life.
Oh yeah.
Well, of course, halflings and gnomes can get in those tunnels. They don't have a problem, but
halflings are fat; they get stuck.
DM Blackwell, if you know anybody who was a Vietnam vet, ask them what happened to the little guy in the squad when they found the Viet Cong tunnels.
Yeah. Plus, halflings are more delicious than the rest of the party. So
but they also went in by themselves. So.
Yeah, but usually the halfling is also a rogue, so it's kind of like if they can actually get the drop on something in a tunnel, they can backstab them.
Eberron, then the halfling's probably a barbarian.
That's kind of when that. Okay,
it's like being attacked by a small dog.
Yeah.
I've owned small dogs. It's not fun.
I don't remember if it's been too long since I played second edition, but I know that 3.0 is kind of like where a lot of the halflings with the same strength as full-sized humans started coming around.
I mean, that was possible in second edition, depending on.
Well, there's a lot of protein in their diet. It's great for building muscle mass.
I mean, if you rolled,
remember,
say, an 18 strength and you want to play a halfling, you still could.
Well, that's the thing is, I think second edition still had the 18 and double lot strength and all that stuff.
Yeah, but that was only for fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't it used to be that 18 strength for like a small creature counted differently than 18 strength for a medium creature, and then so on?
I don't remember that.
I don't remember that in second edition. That might be something older.
Well, second editions, some things were limited on what their maximum strength could be, which is why you had the 18/100 thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wish they still had stat penalties, because that makes the racial choice, species choices meaningful.
I don't know. I mean, it's like, not to poke a specific bear or anything like that, but I mean, I like Peter Dinklage, but at the same time, it's like even if that dude, ate nothing but worked out and trained and ate like half Thor Bjornsson, he's still not going to pick up the same amount of shit.
Yeah.
Well, clearly he was strong enough to beat Bjornsson, so he could eat him. So yeah, there must be something going on there.
You keep what you kill. But no, yeah, I mean, the strength, the different races, some of them are going to... Dwarves are probably much more just packed muscle.
Yeah.
I don't want to say genetically, racially, I guess, species-wise, than say
species-wise. Yeah.
That'd be a good dungeon. A village of halflings that has succumbed to plague and then risen as ghouls.
Ew.
So you have to venture into the hobbit holes, which have now all been tunneled together by these undead halflings.
Oh, well, those hobbit holes no longer mean comfort, do they?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So the solution to that would be like PC stand at the edges of the hobbit holes and just start dumping in tons and tons and tons of oil, and then.
But see, you could get around that because the hobbit ghouls stole something from a caravan that you got to get back, and it's flammable.
Yeah.
What? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that's
And hobbits, rather than kobolds and other things that live underground in stone chambers, they burrow in earth, which is just going to soak up the oil, so it's not going to get that far.
Yeah. There you go. I don't know.
I had a friend who used to hunt rabbits by pumping explosive gas into the warren and setting it off, though.
That was Watership Down, Grim.
That was Saving Private Ryan, the Watership Down version.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did anyone ever play the Rabbit GURPS game?
Oh,
Bunnies and Burrows.
Bunnies and Burrows.
Yeah. How did they work with dungeons with that?
I don't remember it. I did
Same
play
as
it
anything
once,
else.
But I was very drunk and it was at 3 a.m. So I really don't remember much. I think I made a character and then fell asleep. Or character.
Did they really do that?
Well, bringing it back to dungeons though, another good dungeon design, and I mean, you wouldn't typically think of this as a dungeon, but was the old G series Against the Giants, where everything is made for the giants, and therefore it's bigger than everything the PCs can deal with, including like tables, chairs, cabinets, and all this other stuff, where they had to use a lot of climbing and stuff to get up those things in order to get whatever it was on top of it. That, and avoid being crushed by giants. So.
Isn't there like a 5th edition introduction-y adventure where you're like basically shrunken and you're like in a fishbowl?
I don't know. I really don't like 5th edition, so I don't read anything about it much.
That
I don't have
sounds
to.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, you're like shrunken and you're like in a fishbowl owned by one of those creepy sentient fish things. I can't remember the names.
Yeah, it could be fun to do like a Land of the Giants thing.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure if they're ever gonna. They'll probably reprint the Giants thing eventually. I'll bet you anything. That one was too popular.
They're classic. It's a classic series. I mean, even Paizo did an homage to it with their first AP.
Yeah, they did. And there was a dungeon I recall from the old days that actually had good ecology, and that was the Vault of the Drow.
Well, that was the next part after the Giants.
Right. Yeah, well, that whole series just had good ecology all around. But, I mean, Vault of the Drow had a full ecosystem that made sense. because they had mushroom fungi harvesting and all that other stuff, and it all kind of worked out and it made sense. It's like because you got to think about that too. Is like how are these dungeon populations feeding themselves? Are they all just growing lichen and fungus and stuff down there, or
That's
yeah,
not
what?
Vault of the
the
Drow was a
times
whole
10
city.
food pyramid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to like one of the first things I said, where a city can be a dungeon in its own.
Yeah, and that was.
I've got a soft spot for organic dungeons where you get swallowed by something and then have to explore its innards.
So
and there's
basically,
stuff in there.
Jonah the RPG.
Grim,
Yeah.
do you have a vor fetish?
No.
But no, it's kind of I guess not. I wouldn't say classic trope, but it's a well used one.
Yeah. I like
Dragon
Fantastic
Mountain.
Voyage. That's what it is. There's a
well,
comic series
that was a
where
good
a
movie.
bunch of different people get swallowed by this gigantic sea leviathan, and they build a society inside. They're like farming flesh off the inside of the beast.
Yeah.
and trying to avoid its immune system. I can't remember the name of it. I tried looking it up, but it's not the writer I thought it was. So.
Here you go. Then I have something you'll enjoy. I just got my downloads from OSE, and this is one of those ones I got. Holy Mountain
Oh.
Shaker,
That looks
and yeah.
That's a big
And
fish.
well, yeah, you got this big pharaoh fish, and without revealing too much of the cool stuff, and it's actually a neat adventure from the looks of it. I haven't got to read it through it, but
Did they get their inspiration from that underground flesh pit analog horror thing?
ew, I don't know. But yeah, apparently you can get inside the pharaoh fish, and it's basically kind of like a dungeon. I mean, you can go out of the cloaca if you need to.
Well, there's Greg who you've had on, Akaris, he's working on his kaiju game, and he also wanted to do stuff with like humans and power armor and like all that stuff. So I suggested that he should do a dungeon where you're like a special forces team having to go into a giant lumbering kaiju to blow up its heart or whatever. And meanwhile, you're dealing with like parasites that are inside of it, its immune system, like all that stuff. And you've got a time limit because it's lumbering towards a city or something.
I mean,
That's a great inversion of the trope where you're fighting the kaiju from the inside rather than getting in a giant robot. I love that. That's cool.
It's like Interspace.
Yep.
What do I think of the DCC Original Adventures Reincarnated? I love them. I absolutely love them. The very first one I bought was Expedition to Barrier Peaks because I love that module originally way back in the day, and I love the new one even more.
Whereas when I bought the redone of my favorite adventure of all time, I got Curse of fucking Strahd.
Okay, hey, see you later, Anthony.
So that fishing was for Old School Essentials, you said?
Yeah,
Oh,
that was
yeah,
for
I'll have
Old
to get
School
that,
Essentials.
Yeah, I bought that recently, so that looks really cool.
Yeah, it's called Holy Mountain Earth Shaker.
I really have to pick up some more OSR stuff.
Is OSE or OSR?
Just anything like in that field. For
I
the
dropped
most part,
a link for that mystery flesh pit thing in the chat.
Mystery Flesh. Okay.
Sounds pretty kinky.
Wow. let
There's
me-
a whole bunch of this stuff called analog horror. That's one of them.
kind of Cronenbergian.
Yeah, that there was a recent one that went semi-viral about sort of interstitial spaces. Yeah, the back rooms. That's quite interesting.
Yeah,
as well. That's basically a
I've-
dungeon.
I've used that in Mage because it basically is Mage.
Yeah. I had a creepy house in Mage that used to belong to a son of Ether who went crazy and went marauder. So the whole interior of his house, all the like space and time and everything was all messed up. And he'd done the Schroeder experiment on his cat.
Oh Jesus!
But rather than being alive or dead, it put the cat in a state of quantum superposition where it was simultaneously everywhere at once.
Schrodinger's cat, okay, yeah.
So you
See,
would have
this is
just...
why I never played a lot of Mage. It gives me headaches.
That's why I like it.
You see, no, my issue is the second or third time I tried to run Mage is most of the party were all like actual chemists and physicists. And
Oh yeah,
if they know what they're doing, you could do some stupid stuff with Mage.
yeah. Like you can transmute matter at relatively low level matter magic, but then if you're like a chemist or a physicist, you can I turn his penis to francium.
Or there's like some sort of chemical. I forget what it's called. It's some sort of something sulfide that is basically like the devil's hot sauce.
Oh.
and it is like explosive with air.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the stuff the Nazis made. And then the Americans tried remaking it, and it will go off for no reason that anyone can work out.
And they can't, and once it starts burning, they can't put it out.
Yeah, it sets fire to concrete.
Yeah, this stuff is scary, and this
It's like
is what,
Greek fire almost.
Yeah, basically, this is what one of my mage players turned an Olympic swimming pool size bunch of ground to when I threw a were-elephant at them.
Jeez. Well,
they're
that
like,
would
no,
work.
I'm just not doing it.
Chlorine trifluoride.
Yes.
That
stuff
Yeah.
is insanely scary, and it is real.
And
The
now
fact
the
that
FBI
its
has just
oxidizing
added this.
ability surpasses oxygen leads to corrosivity against materials often thought of as incombustible, is known to be capable of burning sand, asbestos, glass, ash of things that have already been burned in oxygen.
Yeah, it will set ash on fire.
Congratulations, everybody who is listening to this YouTube video. You are now on the FBI's watch list.
In one particular industrial accident, a spill of 900 kilograms burned through 30 centimeters of concrete and 90 centimeters of gravel.
So if anybody's going to run, mage, keep that in your back pocket.
Well, anything the players can do, you can do.
But better, because you can run on Archmage and not have to worry about Paradox.
Yeah.
You know what would be? I did have an idea for. It's probably not an original idea. I'm sure somebody has done this before because there are no original ideas anymore. But an idea I did have for a game. I had a couple actually that would be fun that were dungeon based. And oh my gosh, look, Basic Expert showed up.
Yo,
hey,
John.
Hey, don't
Sorry,
set Ash
man.
on fire. We won't.
Is Ash here?
No, he's not.
Oh,
No.
okay.
He set himself on fire.
Yeah, he did.
Who hasn't set themselves on fire?
There you go. But okay, one of my first ideas was to actually have a dragon hire the party to get its treasure back because it got invaded by a bunch of other stuff and they took its hoard.
Yeah, I actually did something similar recently.
See, I knew somebody else had done that before. And the other one was having the party get swallowed by a Tarask, and then they find out that there actually is a bunch of people and like a little colony living inside of it because it's so
With
dang
its
big.
own Tarask.
Yeah,
Just Tarasks all the way down.
Tarasks forever. No.
Like the suction creature from Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, basically.
Well, Expert, you're kind of late to the party, but I'm just curious. Do you have any particular things that you like to talk about as far as dungeon design, world or dungeon building, or ecologies of dungeons and things?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not the best at building dungeons, honestly, but yeah, I think ecology is important. Sometimes I just throw stuff in there. I don't know. Sometimes my dungeons get a little funhousey, I guess, which is probably not everyone's thing.
No, I like stuff like that.
He says he's not the best at building dungeons, but meanwhile he made like a dungeon generator.
Well, yeah, so he doesn't have to build them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But, yeah, I think put doors in your dungeons.
Oh well, yeah. Actually, it's kind of
You
funny.
lose
because,
whole sessions to doors.
Yeah,
Yup.
yeah. It's always funny when you're looking at somebody's pre-made dungeons and they look at their map like, how do you get into this?
Well,
Well,
well, once you start adding doors, is like me and my group, we used to have like the door game where you would get points for opening doors.
Mhm.
And you would also get extra points depending on other stuff that was happening in the room. So if there was combat going on, you'd get points for like the people in combat. And if there was enemies on the other side of the door, you get points for that. So we would run through dungeons trying to score points.
I've noticed that stuff like doors, they get a lot more interesting the more modern the game gets. So like in like D&D, you can maybe lockpick a door. If you're like strong, you can like force it open. In like a more modern setting, you can put a brick of C4 on it, and maybe it'll like blow up the people that are waiting behind the door. Or you can like kick it open and throw in a flashbang. Like
Or
so,
you could also
Yeah.
have different types of like more modern locks, like retinal scanners, DNA
Yep.
scanners.
And depending on the level of the party, they could take a similar approach, where it's like they open the door really quick, throw a fireball in, and close the door.
Yep.
Yeah, but then you also run into the problem with modern setting and modern games with more skill. You just put a few points and say profession chemist, and you have bathtub semtex.
Once again, that FBI list. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, I've been on that for a while.
We've all run games, so we've looked for some weird things.
That's
I've
true.
had to-
I've bought some of the books that Grimm has published, so he's definitely on these lists.
I've had to Google like fertilizer explosives while I was working on my modern fantasy book, so I'm definitely on some list somewhere.
You've seen the stuff I get up to on Twitter, so yeah.
Yeah.
We're in good company. There were those guys that got arrested after a Gen Con once because they were discussing their cyberpunk game that they'd played in like an Arby's or something.
Oh yeah.
Oh no.
Oh my god.
Oh, I can imagine. And that is an interesting one. Okay, Cyberpunk is not generally a game where I think of dungeons in the dungeon sense. I mean, other than the city itself is kind of a giant dungeon.
It goes
Night
back to
City.
dungeons being like the little self-contained areas that
Mhm.
an adventure
Yeah.
plot happens. So you'd have, say, like a splicer lab, or I don't know Cyberpunk, so I'm just going
Yeah,
off.
facilities and
A genetic laboratory where they make
Cool.
chimeras.
corporate tower blocks,
Yep.
Take care, Lord
kind of
Thoth.
Ecology.
Speaking of
And
like tower blocks,
data fortresses.
yes,
Data fortresses, yeah.
tower blocks. There was a really good dungeon that you put out for Blood that was set in like a tenement tower.
Yeah, Black Mass.
That was a
Was
good.
that
That was
one?
the first Blood game that I played. They
Cool.
ran us through that.
Well, basic expert. I mean, you say you don't really make dungeons and stuff, but if you're working on your Aztec game, would you consider to be like the actual structures of the pyramids and things to be almost dungeon-like?
Well,
Like
I'm
the
going.
interior of Chichen Itza.
Well, I'm going more sort of low magic historical.
Uh-huh.
So much of the conflict is probably going to be in jungles or battlefield type stuff. There's probably potential for, maybe delving into Mictlan if you want a little higher fantasy sort of thing.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to keep it very kind of low magic,
More grounded.
more grounded. Yeah. So you're gonna get. I'm trying to figure out, for instance, experience points and like, if you're an Aztec character capturing people and bringing them back to your city for sacrifice, it gives you like an XP boost or something, something horrible like that, But probably for the way I would run it once I'm finished with it, would be probably not with dungeon crawling necessarily.
Well, the jungle could be a dungeon easily enough.
True. Yeah, dungeon.
Yeah.
Like it's not like
was
that
just-
stuff is like easily passable.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You can think of a jungle or a forest in a similar way to a dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of rooms, you have features or clearings.
Yeah.
Instead of tunnels, you have paths or animal trails. Or,
Like the individual
Rivers.
maps in the one. In what was it, the third Tomb Raider game?
yeah.
Each map
Yeah.
would say be like a floor of the dungeon.
Yeah, because it's like anytime you have something that limits your field of vision or senses and stuff like that, that's almost a little bit dungeony in a way.
You could have like a valley that's like very dense jungle, but has like actual like it's enclosed on each side, and then the Spanish are moving in. They don't know the terrain, but the Aztecs do, and they're laying in wait.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking. Because there will be it will be conquistadors in Aztec as well. So
You have stabbed me, but the joke's on you. I have smallpox.
Would you like a blanket?
Oh, Jesus. No.
No, it would be a poncho if this is Spanish. Come on.
Leave the donkeys out of this.
Wow. Okay, you went there. We didn't.
Oh, look, and Poncho Goblins. Hi, John. There you go.
Speaking
hey,
of,
Speaking of ponchos.
yeah.
Um.
Yeah, but like different historical settings would give you a lot more ways to play around with dungeons.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
most D&D is basically Western fantasy.
Yeah, it pretty much European. Yeah.
well, yeah, I'm trying to use like BX rules for what I'm doing, and
Mhm.
it's just funny because you're trying to like the 1 in 66 chance of like forcing a door or something like that. It's like, well, the Aztecs didn't have doors, so what do I do with this?
Yeah.
So you're trying to fit a Western European hole, like peg into like a Central American hole, and sometimes
Yeah.
it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, so
Well,
there has to be some heavy
that's what she said.
modifications.
Well, there's still like things for thieves to do. I mean, because they can still like open doors. And,
I mean,
well, not
there'd be
open, but
traps.
traps, yeah, finding traps and listening and all that, and moving silently and sneaking up on stuff. They're not
I've
picking
taken,
locks
like,
would be harder.
Yeah, I've taken Eagle Warriors because they were kind of like the scouts of the Aztec army, and kind of using them as sort of like a hybrid of like thief and ranger, essentially. So
Yeah,
that's my
sounds
plan.
pretty cool.
Yeah, ranger would work really good in that setting.
Yeah, I've ran into the same issue when I was adding like a South Asian region to my campaign setting,
Mm.
and like there's just some things that don't translate.
There is something to think about for dungeon building that kind of made me wonder about it, and this is a weird one. Okay, if you're assuming that whatever place you're going into, okay, if we define dungeons as like ruins or abandoned places and stuff like that, it's like, and you're talking about doors in the first place, it's like, well, what kind of shape are the doors going to be in to begin with? Because it's like, stuff doesn't last forever.
Unless it's, an Aztec temple.
Well, yeah,
or a nuclear waste storage facility.
Okay, well, typically people don't make
the cheese vault that America has.
Okay, but Kringe, people don't have they don't make doors out of stone typically. So, they're usually made out of wood, and wood will go off after a while. I mean, even if it's, got iron, locks and hinges and all this other shit, it's like the wood itself will punk before, after a certain amount of time. I mean, yeah, I know if it's finished and all that stuff, it'll last longer, but, like if you say, okay, this ruin's been here for like 200 years, I'm kind of like, yeah, what kind of shape are those doors going to be in?
Depends on the wood, I suppose. Or
well, there's two different ways you can handle that. You could handle it like, okay, there's obviously things in the dungeon and they'd want doors after a while. At least, for like the bathrooms and the bedrooms, they'd put something up. Or two, a wizard did it.
Well,
okay, DM Blackwell, stop stepping on my fun here.
Well, you could also say the way I like to think of dungeons is what was the dungeon originally made for, and then is it abandoned? Is it being used for something else right now by its current inhabitants? And so if it's inhabited by a different, let's say like a goblin tribe or something like that, have they made any modifications? Have they added new doors maybe? Have they done anything like that? Those are things you could consider as well.
I can't see goblins taking door maintenance into consideration very much because they just
goblins would want privacy.
Would they though? I mean, they kind of just they just seem like stinky, grubby little people that just kind of live together.
Like, the chieftains would.
Well, okay, maybe yeah. They would want the best fortified area probably for themselves.
And fortifications mean doors.
My goblin chieftain had an escape tunnel underneath the shit pit.
Nice.
So if the players wanted to follow him, they had to,
Yeah, it does work. It does suck to work with. I built a deck out of that shit. I went through so many drill tips.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I've got a question on dungeons, but I'll let people finish first.
No, we're just kind of so ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you guys might be able to answer this as more veteran GMs. Like, I only started GMing a couple of years ago, really, so I still struggle with this. But okay, in more classic dungeons, in this room you're dealing with 1d6 goblins, and then the next room it's another party of whatever. What do you do if the players are being so loud in battle that realistically the whole dungeon should respond to them?
Well, how complex do you want to make the combat?
Yeah. Well, that's usually the thing I'm struggling with, especially in more modern stuff, which I enjoy running. Gunfire is loud. The whole dungeon might hear, you firing that Beretta into the goblin's face. So.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How complex do you want the combat to become?
Yeah, and keep in mind too that people think that the Hollywood silencer is like, oh yeah, it just goes.
Yeah, no.
I'm like, bullshit. No, you put a silencer on a gun, the sound is still loud. It's just not as.
You're still gonna want ear protection.
It's more to mitigate flash.
Yeah.
So what? It will depend on the dungeon. I mean, if the monsters in two connected rooms are both members of the same faction, then that other group might come in to help. If they're just monsters that cohabit but don't necessarily get along with each other, then I just put the monster in the next room on alert.
Yeah.
Which seems not an unfair thing to do, and then when they go busting into the next room, everyone's ready. They've got their bows out and drawn and they're on Overwatch on the door and they've turned over the card table that they were playing at for cover. Things like that. But
and if they're say two opposing factions, maybe they'll run in and help the players.
Yeah.
Yeah, my problem is usually that I like the way I run like dungeons. They tend to be fairly open. It's not like this room is very soundproof, so they can't hear. It's like they would realistically hear that gunshot from like way across the dungeon, so it would put the whole dungeon on alert, which isn't always that fun.
No.
Yeah, and with a lot of games, you can't do the silent commando thing.
Yeah.
Right. You can't come up behind a monster and stab it and silence it straight away because
Yeah,
you can't kill it in one hit. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless there's an assassination mechanic like the old school Essential Advanced stuff has.
Yeah.
And modern games don't usually have, say, field of vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of that too. Is it's also game mechanic stuff because like if you could do it to the monsters, they could do it to your characters, and you wouldn't want that.
Sometimes it's fun to try to fight the predator.
I don't know. I mean, it's like if I tell the characters like, okay, well your character's dead. Well, what happened? Well, a monster snuck up on you. You failed your roll because I rolled it behind the screen here, and you died.
You roll out in the open.
You can roll out in the open, but you don't know what you're checking for.
Something like Predator could be fun for a one shot. You're not going to most of you aren't going to survive it, but see how you go down.
We were playing Legend of the Five Rings, and one of the conceits in that is that ninjas don't exist, but they do. Right? so I was trying to make the ninjas utterly stealthy, utterly mystique. So one of the characters gets very drunk one night. He goes to sleep on his futon, and there is a ninja in the futon. And he takes out a razor sharp hollow needle and just slips it into his arm while he's dead drunk. So he almost bleeds out by the morning. So that's yeah. I'm proud of that one.
It's a fun setting.
Expert, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna say as far as the two opposing like monsters in rooms, I think that's also an important part of dungeon design. From my perspective, is empty rooms too.
Mm-hmm.
Having empty rooms and some space to breathe and explore for the characters to kind of maybe barricade, but then also to have room for random encounters as well is super important in my opinion.
Yeah, and you could also use the empty room to build tension. Like 3 rooms of we barely survived combat, and then there's just an empty room, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, the trouble with that is like doors, right? Players tend to waste a lot of time in empty rooms thinking there must be something there.
True.
Mm-hmm.
You can lose whole sessions to them going, inch by inch over every wall, floor, and ceiling looking for anything.
The 10
I've had it.
Throw the gnome forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Although that's also what wandering monsters are for. I mean, if you strictly follow the wandering monster rules for the dungeon, then that's kind of like your hurry up.
Yeah, that goes
stuff
like
that.
living versus static dungeons.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, what I like to do with the wandering monsters thing is set a limit on how many of those potential wandering monsters might be around. Otherwise, you just end up with too much stuff going on.
Yeah.
Well,
That
sometimes
also happens.
I'll take from another room. So like it's like, oh well, these guys were in this room, and then they wandered this way and ran into the party. So now they get to that other room, and there's less guys in that room, maybe. So
that works too. Now, some time ago, I wrote an adventure that was space based. So the team has to show up at this space station that was previously inhabited, but now it's overrun with zombies. So one of the problems that happens is you have to figure out where everybody is inside the spaceship at what time, because if your characters are at an inner part of the ship, then it doesn't matter so much. But if, like, say, they're at an area where there's an exterior wall and they're shooting all their guns and throwing their grenades and blowing I mean, whoops, you just punctured the hole and enjoy. It's like, have you ever been sucked out of a hole the size of a quarter? Well, guess what? You get to find out.
Bro.
Yeah.
Isn't that what happens to that guy's
way.
ass in Space Truckers?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the space truckers thing. Yeah. And that's something you could always have fun with in a dungeon too. Like if you tell people, it's like, okay, This dungeon is inside of, like, let's say a giant air bubble that's underwater.
In the elemental plane of something.
Yeah.
Or for
Elemental
Victor's
plane
modern
of seltzer.
Yeah,
Victor's
the elemental
modern setting,
plane.
you could do it on,
It's a
say,
demi-plane
an
of water.
airplane in the
The
air.
demi-plane of champagne.
Like that that Steven Seagal movie where he dies in like the first 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
That would
Oh,
be
I
like
already
a
love
fun
that
little
movie.
mini dungeon, yeah, like a anti-terror team having to like deal with like hijackers on a plane that's like flying.
Yeah, that was the
Might be a
opening
little
to the
bit
first.
politically incorrect, but
It was the opening to the first Rainbow Six novel as well.
yeah.
And stay buff too. That also can apply to your modern adventures too. Like, let's say your guys are sneaking around inside of a giant glass windowed office building, and they set off an explosion, and they're at an exterior area where the glass is. It's like boom, you could get blown out the fucking
Yeah, I feel like
building.
60 floors up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rapture is a good dungeon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, think about it. It's all, themed areas, closed in. The whole place is breaking down because no one's taking care of it anymore. So you got leaky tunnels connecting things.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, all the BioShock games and similar like System Shock and so on. They all conform to that idea.
Yeah.
That's the
Video
thing I
games.
haven't.
Video games are actually a really good inspiration for,
Oh yeah, definitely.
outside
Yeah.
the box dungeons. Like you just
And
take,
they-
say, a level of Mario.
Well, yeah. And they do.
Some films as well. If you haven't seen Dave Made a Maze, watch that. That's a great, insane dungeon.
Another one to think about too, and I didn't really start thinking about this until I got to the Farum Azula stage in Elden Ring. Is that okay? That place is crumbling all to hell, and is a lot of open space that you can fall through. And the deal is, it's kind of like I never realized how dangerous falling or how prevalent falling is until you start playing Dark Souls and Elden Ring.
The second
And it's
hardest
kinda-
boss in the Souls games is Gravity.
Yeah,
You should try the co-op mod that recently came out. T-shirt, you would really enjoy it. I've been having a blast with that with my friends.
Oh, okay.
It's called Seamless Co-op, and it lets you just play the game fully with co-op without any limitations.
Nice.
I can't use that thing.
Oh, well, I think my friend is actually testing that out. But okay, in a game that I'm in recently, we had a space we had to cross, and the bridge was out, so we had to like skirt the edge of the wall, and it's just a narrow little ledge. And here I am running a 13-foot tall Minotaur. So needless to say, at one point I rolled a 2 and slipped, so I fell. And underneath, I didn't die from it, but I took a bunch of damage because what's down below is a bunch of ice that's covering a underground river. But the part that sucked was trying to climb back out of it. I made no less than 13 climb checks because I kept slipping or couldn't make it. I mean, eventually my Minotaur got annoyed to the point where he picked up. They had found an elf slaying sword earlier in the dungeon, and it was like small for him, so he takes that thing like a little dagger and starts chiseling handhold and hoof holds to get out of this thing.
Yeah, I don't imagine hooves helped you in climbing.
They did not. They did not. But
Hey,
I mean, it's
mountain
just,
goats.
Well, yeah, but a mountain minotaur doesn't really work.
Mountain satyr, mate.
Satyr would have been better because I could have jumped up there maybe, but
And there's
that
the other
was
thing with where you mentioned Farum Azula. Instead of, you could do like a negative dungeon where instead of walls, it's just the open spaces are the thing that's stop you.
Mhm.
Try to work your way around them.
Mhm.
Can you stop saying Farum Azula because I keep going bibbity bobbity boo.
Hey, you haven't gotten there yet, have you, Grim?
I don't think so.
You'll know when you get
You'll
there.
know it.
I'm in an
Yeah.
ice cave fighting a giant centipede thing with bubbles for a body.
Oh, that thing. Oh,
Oh,
I had to fight him
Estelle.
the other day. He's awful.
Yeah, I'm
Estelle,
not having fun with him.
No, he sucks.
I think that's actually the lower level version. There's a bigger version that's even more awful.
Yeah, there is.
Thanks.
The bigger, more awful version is optional.
Yeah.
Mm.
This is why dungeons need sentient antagonists. If challenges are purely environmental, unless relentless and detailed simulation is your jam, then it just becomes so much. It was tedious. It sucked. I hated it, but the GM kept insisting.
Speaking of environmental, like that's one thing I've noticed doesn't come up much in like D&D and like fantasy like dungeons is like environmental destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a modern thing, if the dungeon is on alert, you could be like, well, this wall is only made out of like brick. I'm gonna like put a satchel charge against it and blow through it and like surprise them that way. I feel that's a bit harder to do in most fantasy settings because you'd be like lugging around like a whole barrel of like black powder or something.
I don't think it's harder to do in most fantasy settings. I think it's harder to do for a human to handle the variables.
There's some spells that allow you to just kind of go through walls.
Yeah, dig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
Pass wall.
you would need a spellcaster. Meanwhile, in like a more modern thing, you can just be a soldier and you have all that stuff on you. You have a brick of C4 in your backpack.
Well, actually, it's kind of funny you had mentioned that, Stay Buffed. I had a character who played a dwarf, and he had profession miner, and he did carry mining tools with him. And the reason specifically was because, if the thief ran across a door that he could not open or a trap that he could not bypass on a door, and, they informed the dwarf about it, dwarf would go, okay, that's fine. He'd pick the wall that's next to it and he'd literally start tunneling through it. I mean, yes, all the monsters inside are alerted, but here the point is kind of unless the monsters are going to hold themselves up and wait for the door to get open like that or the wall to get chiseled down, they're going to probably come out and fight you. Either way, you get what you accomplished. Something opens up, you get an entrance into the room.
Too many drawbacks playing that character outside of dungeons, though, because you can't get served in taverns because you're a miner.
Well, that's also the stuff that you mentioned, like you're on a spaceship and the hull gets pierced and you get sucked out. I mean, you could do that on like an actual like waterborne ship too, like in a more fantasy setting. Like you're fighting in the bilge area, and something happens that pierces the hull, and all of a sudden it's falling into water. But I just don't see that as much in fantasy games. Just haven't personally witnessed it.
It's setting
if
specific.
You blow a hole in the ship that you're on, you have an immediate issue.
Yeah.
It's like, I hope everyone understands the underwater combat rules because that's what's going to happen.
And most ship fighting, in medieval like fantasy type adventure type stuff usually happens above decks because everybody comes out to fight up above the deck.
Well, did you read the Codex Alera by Jim Butcher?
Nah, I don't read.
In one of the books, they snuck into like a ship while it was in the water, and like there was a fight in the hull of the ship.
Oh, how'd that go?
They got what they wanted to do, but they got hurt, but they got stuck in the ship. They had to get their way back out. It was basically like a little commando mission that they did halfway through the book.
Yeah, and see if my Minotaur had been down inside the bilges of the ship and swinging that big old axe around, it's kind of like, yeah, that hull's getting penetrated every time you miss.
Well, the conceit of the series is they had people who could manipulate wood. That's how they got into the ship.
Manipulate wood, you say?
Yes. Not in the Gorian sense, Grim.
Yeah. Oh no, it sprung a leak.
But no, the whole idea behind that series is he combined like Pokemon and a Lost Roman Legion.
Now Grim Stay Buffed is the Dutch guy. He's the one supposed to be plugging up the hole.
Yep.
You can't use dikes; their fingers are too small.
Oh, that's also probably where you don't want to have a critical hit happen because it's kind of like, okay, yeah, your gun or your axe or whatever like that. You managed to kill the guy, but it was the shot was so powerful that it penetrated the hull too.
Yeah,
that was a problem with rifts as well.
Yeah,
because MDC would tear through everything.
Yeah. Get into a bar fight, draw your laser pistol, fire, miss, and wipe out the entire town.
Yeah.
I recently bought the Savage Worlds rifts, which looks really fun.
It handles it a bit better because they don't use MDC.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robotech was that way too, because that's where they introduced MDC, and it was just like ridiculous.
Yeah, but Rifts is just everything goes. So
yeah, it was. It was.
That's why people love it.
The crazy.
In small doses.
It's tolerable if you lean into it, I find. But I'd much rather play it with a different system, something a lot lighter, like Fate or something.
Well, Rifts wouldn't be so bad if it didn't take 12 hours to build a character. and then like 3 seconds to get one killed.
That's just Palladium. Isn't Robotech
Yeah.
like hit on like a roll of 2 or higher with a D20?
Yeah,
It's
basically
4 or higher, I think.
Yeah, 4 or higher.
Or
That's the
over
point. Like,
4.
yeah, how often do you miss?
Right. Yeah, Robotech was our kill count was pretty high in Robotech too. But
I think the philosophy was it's boring when you miss.
yeah,
So
Then why
I
did
mean,
they
it is,
every time
but,
you fire?
yeah.
Why did it shoot like 90 missiles at a time if they were all going to hit?
exactly.
You fired those 90 missiles to make sure maybe 1 or 2 of them hit.
Yeah.
It's
buy the
boring if you
reflex
miss
cannon.
if like every round takes like 20 minutes. Like
Uh,
5th
yeah.
edition.
uh.
I'm going to have to
turn,
call time in a
maybe?
minute because I need to get dinner ready.
And we've already gone way past our normal
you
time.
can carry on if you like. You're having fun.
Let's just go ahead and close it out. I mean, we're 2 hours. We normally stick to a 1 hour show, and it's like we went
Yeah,
way
we're
past
We've gotten
Oh,
well
wow.
out of the wheelhouse of dungeons.
it. We have.
I
But,
feel like it's a thin connecting thread between.
Yeah. But I think we pretty much tackled it pretty good when we did tackle it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
dungeons,
alright,
are,
enjoy
what,
a more
dungeons are what
organic
you make them.
conversation.
Anything can be a dungeon.
Yeah, basically. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out with me and Grim.
Yeah.
And,
Thanks
you
for
know,
having us.
No problem.
thank you.
No problem. And
we need a
thanks to our
topic for
audience.
next time.
We do need a topic for next time. What does everybody want to talk about next time?
I don't know.
Suggestions in the comments. Improve our metrics.
Yes, definitely. We don't get enough comments in our comments. Why is that? I don't know.
Because we don't ask people for it.
Oh, okay. Audience, we want you to make comments. Comment. But be nice when you comment, because nobody likes people who comment badly.
Like, comment, subscribe, tick that bell, and buy our merch.
We
I need to
have
make merch. No,
Anyway,
I need
it's
to make
Raid Shadow Legend.
I'm planning ahead for when people review our older content.
There you
Oh,
go.
At which point we might have merch.
Yeah, maybe eventually, yeah.
Leave some comments on what you think would be a good subject for us to tackle next.
Yeah. And what merch you'd like to see.
Yeah, and what you'd like to see. Yes, definitely.
I mean, you're called the T-shirt historians. Where's the T-shirts?
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get after that, I guess.
Yeah.
We just need to. I don't know. I guess I'd have to start out with a shirt that says, "Hey, everybody out there in YouTube land."
I'd offer Grim body pillows, but we're doing those for tabletopless, so.
Ooh. Surprised like the Grim whiskey flask hasn't become a thing yet, but
That's true.
What about the
There are
Grim
some
punching
places that
bags?
make them.
all right.
Punching bags, yeah. Yeah, that might help people chill out a bit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, y'all take care, and we will see you on the next episode of Dungeons and Discussions. Bye bye.
Yep. Latest.
Later.
Look, the Dungeons and Dragons ride!